Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Negative IQ Gaming, or in this case, Negative IQ Reacts. We are back, and we're doing more Warhammer stuff. It is me, Pyro, and then Frosty is here for his first Warhammer reaction. How you doing?
And good.
All right. So today we have two videos that we're going to react to because they kind of go hand in hand. You can't do one without the other. The first one is discussing all the Primarchs in Warhammer 40k, yes, including that one. And the second one is talking about just the original 20 or excuse me, 18 legions of Space Marines. So I was like, you know what? Instead of separating this into two videos, we'll just do them both together. We might as well. The first one is the Primarchs, because, we gotta start there. Frosty, you know about Vulcan and that's about it, correct?
Yeah.
Fair enough. And then Pyro kinda knows a bit about some of them. You know that Horus is a bitch. Because
And he's a
everybody...
heretic.
Yes, he is a heretic. He's a very dead heretic now.
Isn't his last name literally heretic?
No, it's Horus
No, his name
Lupercal.
is not Horus Heretic.
Could you imagine if it was, though?
I kept
like, I
seeing
don't
people say his last name was heretic.
Because he's the original heretic.
I don't know why my one son whose last name is Heretic betrayed me.
Right?
I wonder why he betrayed me. Sir, you literally named him Horus Heretic.
God, it's
You set out the blueprint. Why are you surprised?
It's almost as on the nose as Karn the Betrayer, who'd know fucking shit he'll betray you. Okay. Are we ready? Because this is a long one.
How long?
Over an hour.
Cool.
Okay.
Good thing
Sure.
we have pizza and sushi.
Yes. Anyway, let's just begin.
In a dark and secret laboratory at the end of the Unification Wars, the Emperor perfected his greatest super soldiers using his own DNA and power from the warp itself. Stolen by the gods of chaos and
also, there's nothing we can do about the quality. This is Minecraft.
We are going to start with
also, link to this original video will be in the description for anyone who wants to see it in full. Also, if we need to pause or you have questions or anything, let me know.
Years later, the Emperor's biotechnical division got to work
one question.
taking genetic material from the Emperor and another.
What's your question, soldier?
What's up?
So were the Thunder Warriors kind of just like the Emperor's version of orcs, except without the British accent?
The Thunder Warriors were
the British.
So, essentially, what the Thunder Warriors were is they were the Emperor's first attempt at Space Marines. They were...
Oh.
The Thunder Warriors were bigger and stronger and faster. However, they had absolutely no concept of self-preservation, and they were insanely aggressive.
Oh.
He was trying to use them to, do what Space Marines do. Take over worlds, defeat armies, so that he could use the world. Except they did it to such an extreme extent that by the time they were finished defeating a world's armies, the world itself was so damaged that the Imperium couldn't use it.
Ew.
So they went overboard. And they also didn't listen to anyone, including the Emperor. They kind of just did what they wanted.
Oh.
He could suggest that they do something, but they didn't always listen to him. So the original Astartes were essentially created to, 1, exterminate the Thunder Warriors, and 2, be the soldiers the Emperor actually wanted.
Let's begin with the first of them to be found. No, we are not just memeing here, saying the Primarch named Alfarius was the first to be found. It's actually what happened, we think. The problem with the father of the 20th Legion is that there's not much known about him, and what we do know is likely either a lie, a trick, or both. But
welcome to the Alpha Legion.
Declared that the first Primarch found was Horus, there is a secret record that states Alfarius was recovered first, his pod landing on Terra itself, and he was kept a secret by the Emperor in order for him and his legion to act as spies unhindered for the entirety of the Great Crusade. Assuming this is true, it also makes a lot of sense. Alfarius is the spy. He was pragmatic, thoughtful, independent, and was a very creative thinker when it came to his approach to combat. Even his physicality helped him to muddy the waters, as he was one of the smallest of the Primarchs, while the Marines of his legion, the Alpha Legion, were typically larger than other Marines. This allowed Alfarius to masquerade as just another Alpha Legionnaire, and vice versa. I am Alfarius became a common thing to hear whenever an outsider asked anyone from this legion who they were. Alfarius lied like it was breathing. What he said in one place was immediately undone by something he said in another, and a big part of that included his name, Alfarius Omegon, which in itself hinted at his greatest secret. Alfarius was not one person, he was two. By some quirk of the transportation method from the Emperor's cloning lab, the Primarch that would become Alfarius Omegon was split into two bodies sharing one soul. However, in keeping with the theme of this enigmatic Primarch, we will be saving the rest of their story for the very end when official records say they were discovered. The Emperor's favorite son, Horus, was officially the first to be found when the Chaos
Kind of
Gods
ironic that
scattered
Horus was the
Primarchs in
favorite.
their pods. The one carrying the boy who would become Horus Lupercal landed on the world of Chthonia, which was luckily quite close to the Sol System where Holy Terra was. Being so close, Chthonia had been settled since the dawn of humanity's interplanetary expansion, and so it was a blasted and ruined place, completely taken over by industry and mined nearly hollow by millennia of resource extraction. The people living there were organized into gangs, with constant warfare over dwindling resources being the norm. It was one of these gangs that found the infant Horus and took him in, raising him to be audacious, opportunistic, cunning, and above all else, hungry for approval. Unlike most of his brothers, Horus did not grow into his Primarch abilities immediately. He spent most of his time on Chthonia trying to earn his name in the constant skirmishes his gang engaged in. Then, rediscovery. After a brief skirmish with Mechanicum tech priests, Horus was identified as the first of the lost Primarchs and immediately sent to Terra, and it was here that Horus really came into his own. As the first of the Emperor's sons to be found, the Master of Mankind spent a lot of time with the young Primarch. Horus was trained in the ways of war and given his very own legion of Space Marines to lead, the 16th, the Luna Wolves. Like every other legion, this one was created using the genetic template of a specific Primarch, making them uniquely able to interface with their commander's abilities and quirks. Reunited with his gene sons, Horus rapidly became a peerless general, which was exactly his purpose. Remember, the Primarchs were manufactured beings designed by the Emperor to fit certain niche roles in his grand plan. Each of them was an experiment to create beings that excel at a particular slice of empire building. We don't have a lot of evidence for what the Emperor was planning for most of his sons, but either through design or through training, Horus became the general, a leader who understood every facet of warfare, who could intuitively plan, react, and improvise to any threat, as well as being a fairly strong combatant in his own right. More importantly, he was the perfect right-hand man. And for over 30 years, this singular general trained and fought by the Emperor's side, gaining a deeper bond with his father than any other Primarch would manage to build. The pair would save each other's life on the battlefield more than once, especially during their wars against the massive Orc Empire of Ulanor, where Horus saved the Emperor from a particularly powerful war boss. So by the time the second Primarch was found on
What's
a
a war
distant,
boss?
icy world,
Essentially a
Horus was used to
leader.
being the only son, and his
Ah.
old
It's
approval-seeking
the boss of
tendencies
war,
from his days as a desperate hive-ganger began to show
Fancy.
themselves. His pride
right?
and superiority complex
Orcs are
were
highly
sources of friction
sophisticated,
between
fancy
Horus
creatures, I know.
and some of his brothers, especially after he won the title of War Master at the conclusion of the Ulanor Crusade, making him the official commander of all Imperial forces, second only to the Emperor himself. But even so, he was still a loyal and good-natured man for the most part. Even his resentment at being abandoned by the Emperor to finish the Great Crusade without him was mostly kept in check until plans set in motion by his brother Lorgar began to poison his mind and tempt him on the dark path of chaos. But that's a story for another video, so let's turn back the clock to that second Primarch and a lonely, ice-covered planet. That world was called Fenris, a hostile, frozen world home to a handful of tough
It's our wolf boy.
living similarly to the barbarian tribes of ancient Terra. But the pod carrying our second Primarch did not land close to one of these barbarian villages. No, it landed deep in the unforgiving tundra, with no one around to take in the crying child that emerged from his pod. Well, no human, anyway. The nameless child was instead taken in by a Fenrisian she-wolf and raised alongside her other pups. Soon the boy was out hunting with them and raiding human settlements. Eventually, they caught the attention of a particularly strong tribe, who hunted the pack down, killed the wolves, and took in the boy. The king of this village saw immediately that something was different about the boy and took him in, naming him Leman, Leman of the Russ. From here, Leman grew quickly, mastering human language and the art of combat. He learned camaraderie and became quick to laugh and sing, taking joy where he could, and generally being a chaotic mess of a man, socially speaking at least.
Checks out.
But in other areas of his life, it was clear that Leman was more than human. He was a giant of a man who fought whole armies on his own, ripped massive trees out of the ground barehanded, and was able to wrestle gigantic mammoths to the ground, and so it came as no surprise when he made king after his adopted father passed away. It was these stories that finally reached the ears of the Emperor as he was commanding his newly formed Great Crusade, and it brought him to the frigid surface of the icy backwater planet in search of what he knew could only be another of his lost sons. The Emperor came disguised as he often did in new places, and Leman refused to bow to him without challenging him to an eating contest, a drinking contest, and a duel. Leman was a simple man, but the Emperor actually failed the first two, finally succeeding in beating the Wolf King in their duel, which was apparently all Leman actually cared about because he swore loyalty right then and there. And it's a good thing too, as Leman was very special even in comparison to his brothers. Remember what we said about every Primarch being a specific experiment? Well, 3 of them were even more specialized than the others, and Leman was one of those 3. Out of all his brothers, the Wolf King was the strongest, most capable fighter, and that appears to have been by design. When one is building an army of superhuman soldiers led by demigods, it pays to make sure you have at least one of them who is both loyal to a fault and able to beat any of the others. As a fighter, he was vicious, relentless, and willing to do anything, including taking potentially fatal wounds to win. As a general, he was all of these things on a larger scale, his savagery translating to decisive assaults. Wolves go for the throat, and even though Russ proved to be a cunning strategist, every engagement he led ended in a brutal and decisive strike, especially when he was forced to fight his brothers. We're not certain if Leman was made specifically to be the Emperor's executioner, but that is what he became. Only a handful of his brothers could have stood up to him in an even fight, and none of them had his drive. And maybe that's what he was actually made to be, the one Primarch willing to do whatever it took to get the job done. The Emperor knew his enemies in the warp were creatures of pure madness, and fighting them could break even the strong minds of his sons, but not Leman. It could simply be a side effect of that mental fortitude that made Leman the perfect choice for enforcing the Emperor's will, even against the other Primarchs. And it was not a secret either, a fact that likely led to Leman being unpopular with most of his brothers. Horus thought he was an unrefined barbarian, while he and Lionel Johnson outright came to blows. But really, it was the looming specter of who Leman was that seemed to keep the other Primarchs from really making a closer connection with him. Leman Russ was a Primarch killer, and had proved it twice. The truth of it is that while Leman Russ would desperately have loved to be friends with the men who were, in name at least, his brothers, it is just too hard to form strong bonds with people who you might be ordered to kill at any moment. It's hard to shake that sort of reputation gained from making the list of your comrades go from 20 to 18. The only thing marking the existence of the Primarch of the Second Legion are an empty statue's plinth and the sad looks shared between Primarchs whenever he is mentioned. Put him out of your thoughts. Official Imperial records show that the next Primarch found was Ferrus Manus, Geonsire of the 10th Legion. Manus was another Primarch whose gestation pod landed in the wilderness of a dangerous planet.
Yeah.
Medusa is a waste world. Generations
Frosty,
of
you got any input?
had made the surface unstable, and
No,
millennia
he
of
said
discarded
something about
industrial
decisive
machinery
strike, and I got
waste
flashbacks to
completed the
DBD.
picture of a gloomy and barely habitable planet.
Decisive
To top
Strike,
it all off,
former
before
Dead by
humanity
Daylight
ever
player.
even
What?
mastered agriculture, the war in heaven had reached
Vietnam
Like a single
flashbacks
tier roll.
intensify.
Yeah,
the
single
old ones and the
single
Necrons laid
tear
dormant
goes down my
in the
eye.
few untouched areas of the planet.
Do we have any questions thus far?
No.
Nope. Other than that, I know now Vulcan's going to be at the very end.
No, he won't.
Wilderness, Varys grew curious and
Are you
decided to
sure?
examine the technology that had birthed him. While studying his pod, he accidentally freed
Remember,
an
Alfarius is at the end.
biomechanical worm-like monster, which proceeded to leave the cave
What?
and began terrorizing the human population. Manus felt incredibly guilty and vowed to take the creature down, an oath that would take him years to complete, finally trapping the monster in a volcano and drowning it in lava, its living metal skin covering his arms, and finally giving him his name, Varys Manus, Iron Hand. During his long hunt, Manus
Wow.
had shunned human
Mhm.
contact, and he didn't become that much more personable afterwards. He did rejoin society and began teaching the nomadic clans of Medusa all about technology, but while he was made ruler, he was very hands-off, preferring that they handle their own conflicts if possible. This is how the Emperor found him, a stern ruler well-versed in technology who preferred action to words. Like his brother Leman Russ, Varys refused to swear loyalty to the Emperor unless he was beaten in combat, and so the two fought a cataclysmic duel in the mountains of Medusa until Manus was beaten and agreed to serve the master of mankind. Reunited with the legion made from his genes, Manus quickly got to work shaping them into a force of relentless conquest. Renamed the Iron Hands after their leader, the 10th Legion was a force known for its armored advances and for showing no mercy to those who proved themselves too weak for the Emperor's vision of humanity. Varys himself proved to be the most stalwart of his brothers, even more so than Rogel Dorn. Once Varys had made a decision, there was no turning him from it, and he was loyal more than anything else. In battle, he was a sledgehammer, and his intuitive knowledge of warfare was second to none, a truth that even Horus would acknowledge later during the heresy, saying that none knew war better than himself except perhaps Varys Manus. Given his stern demeanor, it probably won't surprise you to know that Manus spent most of his time in his forge or in his planning rooms, and didn't form very many relationships at all, much less with his bickering brother Primarchs, with one exception. Fulgrim would form an unlikely and deeply important friendship with Varys, the two complementing each other well despite their differences. The pair would forge weapons for each other, and their trust went deeper than almost any other pair among the other Primarchs, a fact that would become one of the greatest tragedies of the upcoming heresy. Fourth to be rediscovered was the
And
Physician,
then they
the
were
Primarch known as Fulgrim.
roommates.
At his best, he
Mhm.
was a man who excelled at getting the most out of those he
And then they
commanded,
were
and had a great
roommates.
appreciation for the arts and the beautiful things
He
humanity
gets
made.
it.
And it was the planet he landed on as a child that reinforced those traits, though, to be fair, it was more in spite of his surroundings rather than because of them. Hemos was yet another world ravaged by millennia of industrial activity, a trend that should be noticeable by now. Many of the worlds cut off from Terra during the Age of Strife had slowly run out of resources and lost knowledge in the intervening time. So when the pod-carrying baby Fulgrim landed in an abandoned factory district, his coming was like a miracle for the people living there. By the time he was 15, he had identified a number of places to increase the efficiency of his factory district and was given a seat on the local council. By the time he was 50, he had become the ruler of the whole planet and had sparked a renaissance. Fulgrim was running the planet so well that the people of Chemos finally had free time, and so he had fostered in them the love of the arts. And this is how the Great Crusade found Chemos and Fulgrim. The huge Baroque warships of the Emperor's fleet entered orbit, dropships landed and disgorged hundreds of armored space marines, each wearing a work of art never before seen on Chemos. Fulgrim recognized the beauty of these works and the god who led this alien procession, and knelt immediately. Fulgrim, as it turned out, was the Primarch of the 3rd Legion, an army that had recently suffered a catastrophic accident that lost most of its gene seed, the material that lets a legion replace its losses.
Man, fuck you,
Fulgrim
Trazen.
spoke so beautifully to his new sons that the Emperor
Oh, there
himself was moved and allowed the legion to be named the Emperor's Children, taking the Imperial Eagle as their symbol, becoming heralds of sorts for the Emperor's forces. Fulgrim, for his part, took this as a great honor, and he pushed his new legion to become the very best that any Astartes had ever been. Perfection was the only goal, nothing less would do, and it was this drive to purge weakness that gained Fulgrim a strong friendship with his brother Varys Manus, both Primarchs striving to embody the very best of the Emperor's vision for humanity. In combat, Fulgrim led his men with almost insane adherence to the ideals of efficiency and perfection, ensuring that objectives were won with the absolute minimal losses possible. For instance, when asked to take the world of Byzas, Fulgrim won the day using only 7 Marines, taking grievous wounds in the process. Unfortunately, the
That's
size
impressive.
of Fulgrim's legion would force the Emperor
That
and
is
Horus to
very
pull them
impressive,
back
holy
from
shit.
these
Winning an entire battle with
so
7
Fulgrim grew
people.
to be very hungry for approval, while still being so sure that he and his sons were the absolute pinnacles of the legions, a combination that would make him an easy mark for his less loyal brothers later. Continuing the theme of
See, he's not
struggling
last.
with
Look at
the
him. There he is.
Vulcan was discovered next.
Ooh,
Frigid
there you go,
cold,
Frosty.
dangerous
Okay, good.
monsters and collapsing societies were one thing, but when Vulcan's pod opened to the blazing heat of the volcanic radiation-blasted world of Nocturne, it would be fair to say that he probably had to brave the most hostile conditions to start in. Vulcan was discovered quickly and raised by a local blacksmith. Even on a world like Nocturne, where the crust itself is barely holding together at the best of times, humanity still found a way to survive. That tenacity and the sense of community that supported it was something that young Vulcan took to heart. Within 3 years, the boy had already become a strong giant of a man, capable of great works of art in his adopted father's forge, but he was also a great leader, and in his 4th year, he got a chance to prove it. Being a death world where any life possible is harsh and often miserable, Nocturne was almost the perfect hunting grounds for the Drakari, the Dark Eldar, graceful and cruel alien slavers who delight in misery. Every 4 years, like clockwork, they raided Nocturne tribes, and every 4 years the humans living there would hide and hope not to be found. Until a young Vulcan stood in the center of the village, holding only his 2 blacksmithing hammers, wordlessly inspired his community to stand against the alien raiders, and for the first time in generations, the humans won, beating back the Drakari with a 4-year-old Primarch leading them.
Ooh.
Fairly predictably, emissaries from the 7 largest villages on Nocturne had traveled to meet the miraculous child and swore to join him in defense of their world, and it was at the victory celebration that a stranger appeared. He arrived just as a tournament to honor the recent triumph was about to start, and he said he could beat anyone, including young Vulcan. 8 days of back and forth, the stranger and Vulcan each besting the other until the final challenge, a hunt for the largest salamander they could find. It would be more accurate to describe the gigantic lizards that wander Nocturne's lava fields as dragons rather than salamanders, but regardless, the largest kill would win the tournament, and the 2 set out. Vulcan had good luck finding a huge drake and slaying it, but on his journey back, the volcano he was hunting on erupted, hurling him off the edge of a cliff. He held on with one hand for hours, unwilling to drop his prize, but unable to haul both himself and the carcass up. That's when the stranger appeared, with a much bigger kill. Without hesitation, the stranger used his salamander as a bridge to cross the lava and get to Vulcan, hoisting the boy and his salamander up to safety, but sacrificing his own trophy. When the pair returned to the village, Vulcan was declared the winner, but he pledged his services to the stranger anyway, now revealed to be the Emperor, as any person willing to give up glory to save a life was worthy of his service. And just like that, Vulcan was reunited with his father and the 18th Legion, now renamed the Salamanders in honor of the trial that had won the Emperor his son's loyalty. The Salamanders
that's
were
how
the
the
second of
Salamanders
the
came to
Trefoil
be.
legions
Yep.
we mentioned earlier, and while we do
Gotta
know
love the
why they were
Salamanders.
created,
Yes.
this is a story better left
Of course.
for our retelling of the Horus Heresy. For now, it's enough to know that as a byproduct of their very special makeup, Vulcan and his gene sons were immovable in the defense of others. To be clear, this wasn't the stubbornness of the Iron Hands or Imperial Fists. The warriors of the 18th Legion were practical and not above falling back if the need arose. But if their charge was in danger, if civilians needed support, or if there was ever a need for a shield to hold an enemy in place as long as possible, the Salamanders stood ready. And this was reflected in the demeanor of their Primarch. Vulcan was a calm, wise, and steadfast man in most situations. He was kind to those he protected, and ruthless against the enemies of humanity. Vulcan spent a few years learning from the Emperor before truly being reunited with his legion. As the youngest Primarch thus far to be found, Vulcan was truly a child and required training in the ways of war and statecraft, among other things. But soon his first engagements began. It was, of course, a rescue mission. Vulcan arrived to relieve the surviving members of his legion during a fierce battle at the head of 3,000 new recruits, just in time to win the day, but not in time to save many of his sons that he had never met. High casualties would mark the 18th Legion through the rest of the Great Crusade, with the army being used primarily for desperate holding actions and generally anywhere that the Imperial leadership needed to hold at all costs. This led to the Salamanders being by far the smallest of the Legion Astartes, so much so that when Rabute Gilliman wrote the new laws that broke up the legions into smaller chapters, the Salamanders were exempt as they were already at chapter strength. Regardless, they and their Primarch were always the first to dive into danger and the last to leave a hopeless defense. Unlike other Marines, the Salamanders often continued to live in the tribes of their birth with their mortal relatives, which only served to reinforce the bonds they had with unaltered humans. They never lost sight of who they were or what they were truly defending. Officially the 6th Primarch to be found, there's not much at all to say about the early life of Rogel Dorn. Either nothing of note happened, or the typically stoic man simply didn't go into much detail when asked. We do know that the pod bearing the Primarch of the 7th Legion landed on the world of Inwit, a planet tidally locked to a dying star, causing half the planet to be covered in scorching deserts and the other half to be covered in thick glaciers. And it's beneath these monolithic sheets of ice that people living on Inwit made their homes in fortresses carved from the ice itself. The child who would become Rogel Dorn was adopted into the House of Dorn, one of the ruling clans of the planet, and just like his brothers grew quickly and at a young age, he was already bigger, stronger, and smarter than anyone else. But he was a dutiful grandson to the patriarch of the Dorn clan, a man that Rogel would remember fondly for the rest of his life. That loyalty and lack of ego would mark Rogel's entire life. He was a man who was a capable and talented leader, but never showed a hint of ambition to take power. He was dour, serious, and unsmiling, though to those who knew him well, he apparently had a decent sense of humor. After his grandfather died, it was obvious who would succeed him, and Rogel was crowned
That's
the Emperor
something.
of the Inwit cluster in very short order. A large part of his success was that Phalanx, an orbiting battle station built in the Dark Age of technology. The Phalanx had sat derelict in space for generations before Dorn repaired it, bolstering ancient systems and revealing a talent for building defenses and fortresses. But regardless of Dorn using a massive,
That thing is
powerful
incredibly
space fortress to build
impressive.
a functioning spacefaring empire from a grim and resource-poor world, the second Imperial ships translated into his system and he met the Emperor of Mankind. Dorn bent his knee and pledged loyalty. So yeah, out of all his brothers, Rogel Dorn was probably the one with the least personality. He never went against an order until after the heresy, but again, that's a story for later. He never showed ambition, barely even cracked a smile or made a joke, and the only demands he ever made were in the defense of Imperial law. He is even famously one of the only Primarchs with absolutely zero psychic ability, and perhaps that is where he was meant to be. Solid, steadfast,
I wonder why that
incorruptible,
is.
Unquestioning. All these things he had.
Who
and then
knows?
some.
We can't exactly
And
ask
that is
him
to
now.
even lie. He was also a very talented military
He
mind.
dead.
Yeah.
Most of his brothers considered him to be one of the very
Skill
best
issue.
that the Primarchs had to offer. He made well-ordered plans like Gilliman. He
We
was
only
as
just
bold
found
and
out that he's
fearless
dead,
as the
too.
lion, and still made good use of moments
Oh,
of
really?
zeal in ways
Yeah, the
similar
other
to
day.
Jagatai
Like,
and
how
Russ.
often?
It was well known amongst the Primarchs that if a
How
fortress
long
was
ago?
held
Just
by Dorn and
2 days
Dorn,
ago?
then it could not be taken.
That's
Dorn seems to be
good
the
choice.
first Primarch built to maintain the new Imperium rather than just taking more territory. But despite being a fairly boring man by most accounts, Dorn got along well with most of his brothers. Most. His inability to lie and his rigid adherence to Imperial law often got him on the bad side of just about every one of his more morally dubious brothers, none more so than Perturabo. Although a stiff breeze could bruise Perturabo's ego, he had a very special hatred for Dorn, as the two often competed for the title of Best Siege Master. Well, Perturabo competed, Dorn just did his job and kept coming out on top. Eventually, when the Emperor declared Horus War Master and left for Terra and his secret project, Dorn was the only Primarch to go with him. His father wanted him to bolster the Imperial Palace, and he transformed the Himalayan complex into one of the most impenetrable fortresses in the galaxy. And this is why the registered homeworld for the Imperial Fist is Holy Terra itself, with Rogel Dorn being named the Praetorian of Terra. The 7 Legion still claims Terra as its homeworld today, even though from the beginning the Legion was a fleet-based one, operating primarily out of the ancient battle station Phalanx. More than any of his brothers, Rabute Gilliman clearly had the easiest life. The pod carrying the Primarch of the 13th Legion lands on the temperate world of Macrog, a world built with a relatively well-developed society, loosely resembling the Romans of antiquity. He is then found not by slaves, criminals, or barbarian
The
tribe members, but by the
Romans.
ruling
Mhm.
elites of the planet. Gilliman hit the jackpot. The miraculous
Oh yeah,
child
he just got
coincidence was
found by,
given the name
the
Roboute
king and
Gilliman
queen.
and adopted by one of the ruling consuls of Macrogh.
Well,
He
you
was
know,
raised
just
in relative
casual
luxury, given
like.
the best
Mhm.
education and the best opportunities for growth. Like his brothers, Roboute grew quickly and by age 10 had command of his adopted father's armies, far outgrowing his tutors in every subject from philosophy to science to warcraft. But it's what he did with those armies that would give the best glimpse into what kind of a leader Gilliman had grown to be. Two incidents before his rediscovery show his character very clearly. The first is early on in his career. Not long after he was given command of his father's armies, the mountain regions to the north were home to a nomadic population of barbarians that had plagued the more settled regions of Macrogh for years. Young Roboute was tasked with finally destroying them, and at first he seemed to do that, taking their holy sites to force the smaller
I like his
guerrilla
armor.
forces of the
He's very
barbarians
cool
to come
armor.
to him, rather than searching
He
for
does have very
ghosts in the mountains. Once he had drawn them out, though, Gilliman called out for a duel with their leader, rather than put both armies through more bloodshed. But the Primarch had a plan, and as the two warriors fought each other, it became very clear that the barbarian leader couldn't hope to match this preteen demigod. But Roboute never made a strike. He just parried over and over until the barbarian was exhausted and at his mercy. Then, instead of killing him, Roboute brought out an old religious artifact that his father's army had captured some time before and offered it freely. The Primarch won through diplomacy, bringing the mountain clans into the fold by example and kindness. But he was a Primarch still and was not opposed to being merciless when the moment called for it. Upon return from the mountain campaigns, Gilliman discovered that
I mean,
his
at least
father's
he's
two
nice.
consuls
Yeah.
had
Somewhat.
assassinated
Yeah,
him
he's
in
very
a
nice.
coup. They didn't like the changes that Roboute and his adopted father were making to the Macroghan society, attempting to make it a meritocracy where birthright didn't mean as much as skill and passion. Needless to say, Roboute was not kind to these rebels. Oddly enough, it's at this moment that the Great Crusade had reached a nearby system and the Emperor began hearing about this prodigy on Macrogh. He knew immediately that this must be another missing Primarch, but a sudden warp storm kept him away from the system for 5 long years, and by the time it cleared and the Imperial forces contacted Gilliman, he had not only tamed Macrogh as its leader, but every nearby system he could reach. And that's really what Roboute was made to be, a superb general capable of running a complex campaign from individual squad tactics to supply lines and fallback options. But more than that, like his brother Rogel Dorn, Gilliman seemed to be made more for what comes after fighting, rather than just the fighting itself. Roboute was put in charge of his 13th Legion, the Ultramarines, and it was at the forefront of most campaigns in the remainder of the Crusade. In fact, aside from the Luna Wolves and their Primarch Horus, no other legion conquered more territory. Gilliman took whole sectors, then built up their infrastructure, ensuring these places could defend themselves and stood the best chance possible to become valuable parts of the Imperium. Gilliman was also one of the most liked of his brothers, not because he was particularly fun like Leman Russ, or because he was beautiful and charming like Sanguinius, but because he was generally calm, honest, and didn't play around when it came to getting the job done. And he was trusted by the Emperor and Horus, which was good because Gilliman's Ultramarines grew to be the largest legion by a wide margin by the end of the Great Crusade, swelling in numbers suspiciously around the same time the 2nd and 11th Legions mysteriously disappeared. One of the most psychically gifted of all the Emperor's sons, Magnus the Red's story is one that is made in equal parts
Oh,
of
it's the Red
choice
Hulk.
and unearned consequence, but his early life almost rivaled the grandeur of Gilliman's. The pod holding the child that would become Magnus landed on Prospero, a far-flung colony of outcast psychers, mutants who were not welcome anywhere else. The pod came screaming in like a comet and smashed into the central plaza of Prospero's largest city. The boy emerged, fully conscious, and was adopted by the local scholars. And that bit about Magnus being conscious even as he emerged from his pod is important. He was such a powerful psyker that he remembered his whole existence, even his own birth. In fact, it wasn't long before Magnus was having conversations with the Emperor himself via the warp, long before they would ever meet. In this way, Magnus was probably the most prepared out of all his brothers to rejoin the Imperium when the Crusade arrived. In the meantime, though, Magnus set to work on Prospero, cleansing it of a parasitic infestation of psychic wasps and restoring the city of Tizca, which would become the new capital. Prospero was allowed to flourish in a way that no other colony of mutants could ever hope to in the Imperium or otherwise, and by the time the Emperor finally made it there, the planet stood ready to join the Imperium. Magnus and the Emperor formed a deep bond for the time they were together. Big E didn't exactly have many peers who could even come close to matching his psychic might, so having his newly found son with him on dives into the warp was a great experience. Think of it as the psychic equivalent of tossing a ball around in the backyard. But the Emperor had a big problem because he was really trying to push back the forces of the Gods of Chaos, and to do that, he decided the best idea was to give them as little oxygen as possible, which meant ignoring their existence to starve them of the attention they needed to gain power. And this meant that while Magnus was the
Interesting
most
strategy.
gifted of his sons, he had to
That
be
is an
very
interesting
stern with him
strategy.
on many occasions. Magnus was not to investigate or dabble with creatures from the warp for any reason. And then he gave Magnus his legion, the 15th, the Thousand Sons, who were currently suffering from a large-scale mutation called the Flesh Change. Being made from Magnus's genetic material meant that his legion was also home to some of the most psychically active Marines in the Imperium, and without any guidance they couldn't control their powers, even as they tried desperately to ignore them. Magnus and the Emperor worked tirelessly to find a solution, and in the end, Magnus sacrificed his eye in a bargain with the warp creatures to save his sons, and for a time, this stopped the mutations. Here's where things get frustratingly bad for Magnus.
Oh, great.
So every Primarch is made for a purpose,
Oh, no.
and it seems as though Magnus was made to be a fountain of psychic energy. He was more powerful than almost any other Psyker in the galaxy at his height, and his curiosity to learn more so he could grow and gain control was a very predictable outcome of designing a being with this sort of power. Knowing all of this, the Emperor told him to just not poke at the warp and left it at that. He never really told him why. He never went into specifics. It's like telling a child not to touch an oven, but not that it will burn you if you do. And so, of course, Magnus kept researching and poking at the warp. The Imperium, though, was very superstitious about Psykers and mutants in general, so even amongst his brothers, Magnus was viewed with suspicion, and in some cases, outright scorn. It didn't help that the further and further the Crusade got from Terra, the more strange creatures it came across, including many warp creatures that no one could identify. Demons weren't a known thing. Remember, the Emperor had strictly clamped down on that knowledge, so it was blamed on Magnus and his legion, with even the other Primarchs distrusting him due to his use of warp sorcery. But Magnus was determined to prove the usefulness of Psykers in warfare when it was properly tempered, and he developed the Librarians, a special group of Space Marines who were sensitive to the warp and who could be trained to use their powers for the benefit of the Imperium. Librarians proved so effective that the practice soon spread to almost every legion, much to the anger of Primarchs like Mortarion and Leman Russ. The debate over the use of psychic powers grew so heated that eventually the Emperor was forced to call a special council to decide what to do, and on Nicaea, Magnus and his doctrine were put on trial. It was a difficult and lengthy process with Primarchs and Marines from many legions weighing in on the pros and cons, but eventually the decision was made that the only Psykers allowed in the legions would be the astropaths and navigators that are necessary for warp travel, and the librarians would go back to being normal legionnaires, strictly hiding their psychic abilities. Magnus was unhappy with the decision, but he held it for a long time, even dissuading his brother Lorgar from secretly researching the secrets of the warp after the council had ruled. Of course, things were progressing now in a way that would leave Magnus very little choice but to use his might to help the Imperium, but that's a story for later. 10th to be found was
Damn.
Sanguinius, the
Mhm.
I want to hear that story now,
The
though.
Primarch of the 9th Legion was perfect.
If we
and
do a
was
video
as
on the
close to a
Horus
very seat as
Heresy, we'll.
possible in this lore. He was kind and compassionate
What do
while
you-
being strong and merciless against
Frosty,
those
why
who
are
would
you
do
so
harm to
silent?
humanity. He had powerful psychic
That's
gifts,
a great
including
question.
Because it's
strong
very
ability to
quiet
see
on
the
my end,
future
and
like
I'm
his
trying to
brother
listen.
Conrad.
Then
Except
tell me
he
to
wouldn't
turn it
be
up.
driven mad by it. He was a masterful
Like, I
combatant,
can
a
do
courageous
that.
and wise leader, a brilliant
can be turned up.
tactician, and beloved, or at least respected, by every one of his brothers. And yes, that
But
is
he's
over
just
the top,
holding the
almost
TV.
cartoonish so, but we should remember that the story of Warhammer 40K
Is that better?
quite often drifts into the operatic, and Sanguinius
I can't tell a
is hardly
difference.
the only character with outrageous.
You might want to actually
Maybe
just.
turn your own.
We would argue that the inclusion
Why not turn your personal volume?
Yeah, might as well. You might want to turn your game up.
My game is all the way up.
Are your headphones turned up?
Yes.
There's no reason why it should be this quiet then. I mean, I can turn it up even more.
Of a perfect sun was necessary in this larger-than-life story. The pod-carrying Sanguinius crashed into
Can
the
you tell a
planet of
difference
Baal,
now?
a world that had suffered nuclear and
A
chemical
bit.
warfare throughout
Okay.
the Dark Age of technology, and as a result, the surface was a blasted and irradiated hellscape dominated by hordes of mutant tribes and a group of unstated humans who struggled to fight for what little resources still existed. These are the people who found the baby Primarch glowing and beautiful. Like his brothers, Sanguinius grew quickly and was taller and stronger than any of his tribe mates by his first year. Oh, and he also had grown wings. No one is sure if it was a quirk of the radiation on Baal or if the Emperor had designed him this way, but Sanguinius had grown an obvious, if beautiful, mutation, a pair of pure white wings that were strong enough to allow him to fly. That, plus his incredible psychic abilities, allowed Sanguinius to lead his tribe called the Blood to victory after victory against the mutants of Baal. And so he was able to secure a future for his found family, even if it was still harsh on the planet's surface. This is when the Emperor appeared, disguised himself as he has done several times, trying to gauge the character of his lost son. But Sanguinius had the gift of foresight because of course he did, and he had seen this stranger in his dreams, knowing who he really was. Sanguinius didn't challenge the Emperor, nor did he immediately bend the knee either. For the first time, a Primarch bargained with the master of mankind. Sanguinius knew what the Imperium was like and knew that his tribe mates would likely be called just in case of hidden mutations, so he set a condition of his service upon them being allowed to live, which the Emperor agreed to. Sanguinius then asked something that no other Primarch had. What would happen if he refused to join? To this, the Emperor gave probably the best answer possible. He said that wouldn't happen because Sanguinius was clearly a man who cared about protecting humanity. He had saved the people of the Blood, and now that he was being given a chance to save humans across the galaxy, there was no way he could pass that up. He was correct, and Sanguinius swore loyalty without further conversation. Baal was set up as his legion's new homeworld, and after a few years learning about Imperial life and warfare from both the Emperor and Horus, he was given control of his legion, the Revenant Legion as it was called at the time. The 9th Legion had basically devolved into a pack of wild killers at this point, scattered across dozens of campaigns, fighting wherever they could. They had all of Sanguinius's rage, but none of his control, and so upon meeting them for the first time, he instead made an oath to them. These men would no longer be honorless berserkers, they would have his leadership and his strength, and in return, he would share their fate. Redemption or damnation, the great angel would be with them, fighting to make them the greatest legion of them all. His passion and intensity drew his men to him eagerly, and with the help of his psychic abilities, the raging flaw in their blood was calmed. From then on, the Legion was known as the Blood Angels. At this point, you all must be thinking that it's hypocritical for the Imperium at large, just especially the other Primarchs, to have seen this obvious mutant with potent psychic powers and just universally chose to adore him, whereas Magnus and Conrad are just seething in the background. But as far as the lore shows, none of Sanguinius' brothers resented him until the heresy. Favoritism aside, Sanguinius never fell victim to his ego or believed himself superior to any of his brothers or even his own sons, and true to his word, the Blood Angels quickly became one of the most honorable and effective legions in the Imperial war machine. His friendship with his brothers grew deeper the whole while, especially Horus, who believed that Sanguinius should have been made War Master instead of him. Sanguinius was the best of them and more like the Emperor than any of the Primarchs, he had said. What happened between those two later on is perhaps one of the most painful tragedies in this story. Possibly the greatest fighter of all the Primarchs, Lionel Johnson was found next on the heavily forested planet of Caliban. A pod bearing the mark of the First Legion crashed onto the cursed planet way too close to the Eye of Terror. This proximity to the largest open warp portal in the galaxy made Caliban a dangerous place, full of warp-tainted monsters. Even the forest itself seemed to have a malign intelligence. Here, the history books lose track of Johnson, as he had landed far away from any human habitation. Somehow, the boy spent a decade in that monster-filled jungle, something almost impossible for even a Primarch to do, But of course, like every one of his brothers, a brush with civilization was inevitable, and some local knights on a monster hunt came across the wild giant of a man and almost slew him out of
Yippee.
fear. But their leader, a man named
Damn.
Luther,
The
calmed
yippee
the whole
is
situation and
they
convinced
almost
the boy
killed
to
him.
come back with them.
Yippee!
From there,
Oh.
it's a very predictable story. Now given a name, Lionel Johnson grew quickly, outstripping all his tutors and instructors, rising through the ranks with Luther, who had become his very best friend. The people of Caliban were organized into fiefs ruled over by various knightly orders, very similar to the medieval Europe on Terra. Not long afterwards, Luther and Johnson had gained enough fame that they began to form a coalition of the knightly orders. They believed that altogether Caliban could be cleansed of the monsters that had terrorized its people for generations. Luther was a skilled orator, something that Johnson never really gained a taste for. Regardless, in a single decade, the entire planet was cleared and made safe for the people of Caliban, and Johnson, who had led the overall effort, was made
Yeah,
Grand
good
Master of his
things.
order.
Mhm.
You can imagine that Luther was a little jealous of that, which is something that he never really got over. Johnson spent the following years gathering every other order under his banner until he ruled the planet, which is precisely when the Forward Scouts of the Great Crusade reached the Caliban system. It seems like Johnson didn't fight or challenge the Emperor when they met, which is a bit odd considering how audacious and proud he was at the time, but it could also be that Johnson simply recognized the Emperor as a superior being, or perhaps had some awareness of him already, like some of his brothers had. Either way, he was immediately placed in command of the First Legion, which was swiftly renamed the Dark Angels. The First Legion had been the Emperor's favorite tool for quite a long time, even after Horus was found, and so their leadership was actually very slow to accept their gene father. The Lion, however, was in no mood to accept any insubordination and dueled every company commander he could find, famously fighting a captain wearing Terminator armor while Johnson wore nothing but his usual clothes. It was the right move, and both sides gained respect for one another.
That's
through the ritual.
insanely impressive.
The same could
My
not be said
God.
for the
That
nobility
is
of Caliban,
insanely
who were
impressive. What the
scared of
fuck?
change. They attempted to assassinate both the Emperor and Johnson, but were soon after pacified.
That's a bad idea.
Unfortunately, this would not be the last time Johnson was forced to act against his own people, as resentment continued to grow while he made a name for himself and his legion on the crusade. In terms of his relationship with his brothers, most found Johnson irritating and full of himself, which he was. Mind you, he was also probably the best fighter of them all, and at one point openly fought his brother Leman Russ over a disrespectful slight during one of their campaigns. Lion was a loyal son, but he had ambition, pride, and was competitive by nature. That, coupled with his difficulty understanding the emotions of his brothers, led him to be liked only by a few and only in small doses. This would change with time, but for now, this is where we leave the first Primarch. A pod containing the Primarch of the 4th Legion streaks across the night sky of a distant world named Olympia, coming to rest in the mountains far from any human settlements. For a whole year, the child inside would be alone, and as he grows to his full gigantic height, he becomes known as an elusive wanderer who slays the dangerous beasts of the mountainside wilderness. While engaging in
I know
some
who this is.
curiosity, the boy is found by guards of a nearby city and taken to the local tyrant. This man immediately understood that the boy was more than a normal human. Being taller than a full-grown man at 1 year old was likely a bit of a giveaway. He adopted the boy and made every attempt
Yeah,
to show him
You
love,
don't say.
something that the Primarch would never reciprocate.
This
He
kid
chose
is
for himself
taller
the name
than
Perturabo
me.
and refused to grow close
Yeah,
to
I'm sure he's a
anyone
normal
except
human.
He's
his
fine.
adopted sister. Perturabo was interested only in excellence, efficiency, and cold logic. He led his father's armies in subjugation of the other fortified cities of Olympia, but only because he wanted experience with siegecraft, something that he would indeed become known for. This was the man that the Emperor found when his crusade reached Olympia. Perturabo tossed aside
Emperor
his
does
adopted
have really
family
cool
easily
He
and
does.
took up his new legion of super soldiers made with his genetic material. He named them the Iron Warriors, and he was just as ruthless with them as he was with his enemies. After looking over their war record, Perturabo decided that his Marines were lacking in many areas and punished them by ordering decimation. 1 in every 10 legionnaires were chosen by lottery and beaten to death by his squad mates, and he ordered this more than once in the coming decades whenever his Marines failed to hold up to his exacting standards. And so he became known
Dear
as the
God,
man of the
that's a
negative
choice.
traits rather than his talents. In fact, we are of the opinion that no Primarch squandered their gifts quite like Perturabo did. The Lord of the 4th Legion was even more of a genius than most of his brothers, able to understand the workings of any machine by simply studying it for a while. He was able to think so quickly and at such large scales that he had a computer grafted into his skull to handle some of the more mundane tasks and calculations involved in managing a battle. But all of
So
that
he's
didn't
just
help him
autistic as
overcome
fuck.
his greatest
Yes.
enemy, himself.
He's just really he's
Perturabo
the
was
first
self-important,
autistic
petty,
man.
and jealous. His great mind was often turned to how
Yeah.
unfairly
So
Father of autism.
there is a very
He's not just autism, he is the autism.
there is a very popular meme, and it's comparing the Iron Warriors to the Imperial Fists, and it's weaponized autism versus autismized weaponism.
His best weapon.
Jesus.
God.
God damn.
he was being treated. His brother Rogel Dorn, for instance, was given some of the most glorious campaigns and was trusted to build the fortifications on Holy Terra itself, while Perturabo's legion was given the most thankless and grueling sieges imaginable, taking tremendous losses over and over again. To his credit, Perturabo may have complained and whined like a petulant teenager, but he did his job and he did it well, and for the most part his stoic nature kept all the whining internal, but that sort of brooding poisons even a Primarch's mind over time. This bitterness led him to make foolish mistakes and quarrel with his brothers when he didn't have to. It also made him a very easy target for later heresy, although that's a story for later. Mortarion of the 14th Legion is an interesting case. Uncompromising, grim, relentless, but also angry and bitter. He is a Primarch forged by hardship
scythe.
and is one of
Yeah.
the very few cases of an eventual
Scythes
traitor
actually don't
who
work
could
as
possibly
weapons.
have
Not
remained
very well.
loyal were it not for the pressures and calamities
I mean,
that
I know
struck
there's
him
actual
and his
war
legion.
scythes
In the
where
beginning,
they
the boy
just
who
kind
would be
of
Mortarion
took the blade and
crashed
turned
onto
it
a
90
poisonous
degrees
world called
Yep.
Barbarous,
upwards.
directly onto the remains of a recent and cataclysmic battle. The victorious alien warlord suddenly heard the cries of a child echoing across the battlefield and was surprised to find a human-looking boy. Barbarous is choked with poisonous fog that rests thicker and thicker the higher one travels into the mountains. Doesn't have much effect on the alien warlords who ruled this planet, but for humans, even a Primarch, it was very toxic. Luckily, the child was stronger than a normal human, and so could survive a little bit of the poison, and so the warlord named him Mortarion and kept him in a private villa on the mountainside
Just a
as a
skill
sort of
issue,
pet.
man. If you're not
Mortarion
immune
grew
to
like his brothers
poison,
had,
get
with
Right?
the
good.
warlord teaching him everything he knew about fighting and leading armies. He would take the child with him on campaigns against other warlords, and Mortarion learned quickly, but he was not grateful to his adopted father. Mortarion saw that the warlord was not human, and knew that his own people lived below the poisonous fog. He also knew that the warlord was afraid of him, having built his own home much higher in the mountains, in such thick fog that even Mortarion couldn't breathe. So he escaped, climbing down to the human villages to see what his people were like. He found frightened, superstitious people who were constantly under attack from alien warlords, using warp magics and strange technology. By now, of course, Mortarion himself looked a bit like a monster. He had come from inside the fog that no human could survive, and he was monstrously huge compared to them. But eventually, as he helped with harvests and made himself useful, the humans began to trust him. And that's
He's a
when a
great guy.
minor warlord attacked.
Yeah.
The gigantic
Oh,
Primarch
God.
grabbed a two-handed scythe and destroyed the attacking army, chasing the surprised alien leader into the fog and killing him to the cheers of the human villagers. And so a peasant uprising began. Mortarion taught them how to fight, taught their blacksmiths how to make weapons instead of farm tools, and made crude respirators for his new army, his Death Guard. When the next alien army attacked, he seized the initiative and charged up the mountain with his army, and together they began to take out the aliens one by one. This time, fighting in the fog strengthened humans and Primarch alike, and on the eve of the final battle with Mortarion's adopted father, a stranger arrived. You all know where this is going by now. It was the Emperor, though Mortarion didn't know.
Of course
He
it
challenged
was.
the Primarch to
Yep.
take his former
Who else is it
father's
gonna be?
fortress alone, on the condition that if he failed, he would swear loyalty to
John
the stranger.
Cena.
Mortarion was proud
Sure.
and would not back down, even
Da,
though
da,
being so
da.
high up meant
No, if it was John
politics,
Cena,
but
Mortarion.
puppy
If it was
fights.
John Cena,
Predictably, it
Mortarion
did
never
not go
would have
well
seen
for
him.
as the hoses on his breathing
True.
apparatus
Didn't have
melted
seen him
and he
coming.
passed out. The stranger stepped in, saving him and revealing himself to be the Emperor at the same time, and Mortarion, true to his word, pledged himself. He was given the 14th Legion, the Dusk Raiders, who he renamed the Death Guard after his brave army of peasants. Recruiting from Barbarous meant that the 14th Legion became known for relentless assaults and uncompromising advances. Whenever there was an enemy that was too tough to break, Mortarion and his Death Guard were called in and simply walked forwards until they ceased to be a problem. Humorless and strict, Mortarion didn't make
Oh my
friends
God.
amongst
And it
others,
worked.
either being enraged by
Hey,
their
so
use
there's a
of psychic
problem here.
powers like he was
No
with Magnus,
need.
or accusing others
Not
of being
anymore.
too soft
Yep.
thanks to having a more luxurious upbringing like Guilliman. He grew bitter, like Perturabo did, about getting the most thankless assignments, but he did grow very close to Horus during his time in the Crusade, a relationship
bad
that
idea.
would lead to his downfall. Okay, look,
I
no
don't
one
think I
likes
like
him,
that
but
idea.
we have to talk about Lorgar.
No,
This
fuck
guy is
Lorgar.
really the whole reason the Horus Heresy even happens. There are factors involved.
No,
with
we
him
have to
turning the dark
learn,
powers of chaos,
Jack.
but at the end of
Fuck
the day,
Lorgar, though.
Lorgar is the first
We
heretic.
have to learn
The
about
blood-holding new child that would
Lorgar.
become
Well, then
Lorgar
stop yelling.
Aurelian crashed into the deserts of the planet Colchis and was found quickly thereafter by a band of nomads who recognized that this child was something special, and they weren't the only ones. A wandering priest named Corferon also immediately recognized that this 17-day-old child the size of a 10-year-old was clearly more than human, and after convincing the boy to come with him, Corferon slaughtered the nomads to keep Lorgar a secret. The boy was
Just
then
ignore
raised in
this
a
kid.
harsh, religiously strict environment.
You
and
don't
it was
see
clear
shit.
that the first bit of poison worked its way into
Just the
Lorgar's
Madagascar
character.
thing. You
It seemed
don't
the boy
see
had a natural
anything.
draw to faith,
Yep.
and to the fervor that
You
comes from
didn't
truly
see
believing in a cause.
anything.
Had he been raised on Terra, this might have translated into a strong adherence to the imperial truth, but instead he took on the religion of his mentor, and Corferon worshipped the primordial truth, one of the many names for chaos.
Oh,
He
great.
physically and mentally abused the boy, ensuring that Lorgar was loyal to him alone and pushing the extraordinary youth to seek a leadership position. Corferon knew Lorgar
The
had
power
what it
of
took to rule
Emperor
the whole
compels
planet,
you.
and he wanted to
Now this is
control
chaos.
the next ruler of Colchis.
The
As
power
Lorgar
of
grew
chaos.
more
compels
powerful,
There we go.
his psychic abilities began manifesting. He began dreaming of a golden armored giant and a cyclops in blue robes coming to Colchis. He interpreted this as the return of the primordial truth, but really, he was seeing his brother Magnus and the Emperor in a prophetic dream. Regardless of the truth, this was too much for the established religious rulers of the planet. They declared Lorgar a heretic, which is ironic in hindsight, and attempted to arrest
Yeah.
him. But Lorgar had not only become a fully grown Primarch, but he had many devout followers, and within the next 6 or so years, Lorgar was the undisputed ruler of a fanatically loyal planet. And then finally his dream came true, and the Emperor arrived with Magnus at his side. Lorgar, of course, had been waiting for this and gladly pledged his loyalty to his true father. The worship on Colchis changed overnight to worship of the Emperor, something he did not agree with at all, but Lorgar was new, and he indulged his son for now. Lorgar was given the 17th Legion, the Imperial Heralds, now renamed the Wordbearers after Lorgar himself, and the title he had gained while purging the unfaithful of Colchis. It is clear that Lorgar was originally meant to be that zealous face of the Imperium, the first thing the enemies of humanity would see, and they acted in that way for many years of the fighting in the Crusade. But Lorgar would not stop worshipping his father as a god, and this led to the first real signs of trouble. Wherever the Wordbearers went, on every world they conquered, they erected a cathedral to the Emperor. They made the office of the chaplains religious leaders for the Space Marines that would eventually be adopted by every legion, and not only was the Emperor displeased with the slow progress of the 17th Legion as they kept pausing to establish these churches, but the Emperor was disgusted with the religion. Space Marines are for battle, not faith, he told Lorgar, and demanded he stop. When the Wordbearers continued, more drastic measures were taken. It was even rumored that the Emperor almost used the Space Wolves to remove the Wordbearers from history, like the 2nd and 11th Legions had been. But some of the other Primarchs,
Yeah.
likely his brother Magnus, who had formed a close relationship with Lorgar, begged for a lighter sentence. So the Emperor ordered the Ultramarines and their Primarch Rabutai Guilliman to come with him to Lorgar's perfect capital city of Monarchia and raze it to the ground as Lorgar was forced to watch. That was the last straw. It was too much, and it was while the Primarch mourned his city and the loss of his faith that his old mentor, Corferon, came to him and reminded him of more worthy beings to worship. From there, plans began to be written while Lorgar and the Wordbearers pretended to be model Imperial soldiers, and the snowball began to slowly roll downhill. The Horus Heresy had begun. The Great Khan is a strange case amongst his brothers, not because of any particular quirk or cartoonish failing, but because there's nothing really strange about the man, aside from him being a genetically modified superhuman demigod, of course. Jagatai
That's
landed
pretty
on a planet
strange.
called Chogoris, or Mundus Planus if you're an Imperial surveyor. This planet is
basically a
almost a
basic bitch.
paradise, wide-sweeping plains of green
Kinda,
grass, gorgeous
compared to
fields,
the others.
and deep blue oceans. The people living there were loosely organized into nomadic tribes, relying on their horses to hunt and travel. There was, of course, conflict between the tribes. Raiding and slavery were common, and larger tribes formed empires that ruled large areas of the plains. Jagatai was found by a smaller tribe and spent most of his early years doing what every other tribesperson was doing, fighting and hunting. But just like with his brothers, his quick growth and effortless excellence marked him out as different, and many of the local tribes came to revere him as a gift from the gods. The biggest thing that made Jagatai different was that he was totally disinterested in fighting, or rather, it might be more accurate to say that he was much more interested in what happens after the fighting, in the future that could be won by fighting, and that mentality wasn't just rare among the tribes of Chogoris, but among his brothers as well. At some point, his adopted father was killed in a raid from another tribe in the area. Jagatai might have been a man of peace, but he was still a Primarch and would not allow this attack to go unanswered. Gathering what warriors he could, the young Jagatai found the offenders and wiped them out wholesale. Afterwards, Jagatai seemed to have come to a realization that he was feeding into the same cycle of violence and revenge, and so he swore that he would end the fighting and unite the tribes under one banner. Now, it took him over a couple of decades, but he did eventually conquer every settlement and tribe, absorbing them into his horde. And he mostly succeeded by relying on fast-moving light cavalry. He would attack and withdraw, fading into deserts and open plains to avoid counterattacks, while baiting his opponents into chasing him. Many of his brothers would later criticize Jagatai for these dishonorable tactics, but the Khan rarely lost and often took down forces many times his size. He was also a very practical man,
That's
and when the
impressive.
Emperor landed on Chogoris, he recognized him
Too
for
bad
what he
he's
was,
also dead.
a powerful human warlord who could help him unite his people
We
across
learned
the
that 2 days
stars.
ago too.
He pledged his loyalty immediately. Jagatai was the
RIP
Primarch of the 5th
pepperonis.
Legion, the Star Hunters. Luckily for him, these Marines already fought in a way that he was used to, being used primarily as scouts and fast-strike forces. What they lacked was a sense of self, and Jagatai saw to that immediately. Remember, he was a man who thought about what happens after the fighting is over, and he firmly believed that if a warrior didn't have a peaceful way to express themselves, it could lead to disaster. And so he encouraged his sons to take up the arts, writing, painting, music, anything to help them grow and experience culture. He was proven to be very correct in this, as just like the Iron Warriors, the 5th Legion, newly renamed the White Scars, were often given the most grueling, thankless missions. Scouting and hunting elusive enemies across the stars was hardly glorious and took a long time to finish, but they never gave up on a hunt, and unlike their Iron Warrior brothers, they never grew bitter or resentful because they had more in their lives than just moving from one mission to the next. If only all the Khan's brothers
That's
were
nice.
so level-headed. Nostromo, a planet in perpetual night, was rich in adamantium and the
curs.
suffering that comes with large-scale mining operations.
like him?
No, I
Weakened
like
and
him a
overmined surface
lot.
Was barely able to hold up most buildings.
He just
let
got
alone a
fucked
pod
over.
Screaming in from the polluted upper atmosphere.
fuck.
A
You'll
pod
see.
marked with the number 8, slammed straight through the upper crust of Nostromo, deep into the heart of the planet. Down that far, the only things around were people conscripted into mining adamantium and the wild animals that had adapted to
adamantium.
living in the urban conditions. Unlike his brothers, nobody ever adopted Conrad. No one ever found this miracle child and took him in to raise him, and so he grew up feral, hunting wildlife for food and observing what he could of the humans around him. Everyone born on Nostromo had never seen sunlight, and those living at the lowest depths couldn't even afford artificial light, and so they had adapted to living in total darkness. But Conrad was a Primarch and could see everything. Extreme poverty is what breeds crime, and injustice was everywhere. The young Conrad may not have been taught by anyone, but he knew enough to know that hurting someone is wrong, taking their things is wrong, and as he grew, so too did his understanding of those concepts.
So he got
Nostromo
morals.
was a capitalist oligarchy. The planetary rulers were all
Disgusting.
wealthy mine owners or industrial leaders, and they were corrupt to the very core. Whatever flimsy pretense the planet had for a justice system was of course rigged to only ever affect the poor and never the rich. Hers saw this and had the power to change it. Petty criminals started to be found dismembered on the streets, then prominent leaders and corrupt officials would be found hanged and disemboweled. Crime began to rapidly disappear as mothers warned their children to behave lest the Night Haunter find them. The nickname stuck. In fact, Conrad felt it was a more fitting name than any else he had received. Eventually, as crime in his city completely ebbed away, the Night Haunter revealed himself to the people and took his place as the monarch of Quintus. He even allowed himself some hope that his planet could be saved. He used his new power to gather knowledge, learning everything he could about as many subjects as possible. He led fairly and justly, even becoming known for his patience. But then, the nightmares would start. Like many other Primarchs, Conrad was a very psychically gifted man, and his particular abilities involved foresight. But he was plagued with visions of a dark and terrifying future, including his own death, since he was very young, and whenever he would seem to be getting a hold of himself, he would have another seizure, see the end, and go hunting for criminals. This, of course, is the problem with believing oneself to be the arbiter of right and wrong. Eventually,
okay, cool.
you
I'm
will
finally
lose sight of
mentally
yourself
stable.
and become a monster that uses
happens.
fear rather than compassion to get yourself.
Nightmare.
It was this sort of man that met the Emperor, Fulgrim, Pharismanus, Rogaldorn, and Lorgar when the Crusade reached Nostramo. The Emperor told Conrad that he was here to take him home, but Kurz replied that he was the Night Haunter and had already seen what the Emperor would do to him. Nonetheless, he did pledge his loyalty, knowing how inevitable his visions often were, and was given his legion, the 8th Legion, which he named the Night Lords. The biggest problem with this was that the 8th Legion had been formed from prisoners on Terra, and we all know how Conrad felt about criminals. He attempted to...
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest things that just... Why would you do this to him? He hates criminals. His legion is entirely made of nothing but criminals.
That's so fucked.
Yeah, why would you do that?
So is his
cool.
place?
No more criminals. Your legion
is his
now
place-
criminals. God damn it.
So this whole time they're talking about like each Primarch has a different job. Was he supposed to be like the justice system?
That's what he thought he was.
Okay.
No, because that would have been so perfect for him.
Yeah.
I'm Batman.
Yeah, but this is
It
Conrad
would have been a
Kurz, so he
fair
gets...
justice.
Here's the thing, this is Conrad Kurz. He doesn't get shit that he wants.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, I want this. No, you don't.
Yeah, he grew up on the street with nothing in one of the most dangerous planets in the entire galaxy. Was found after making his planet completely crime-free, taken away from his planet. His planet immediately went back to being one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. And then he was given 1,000 soldiers made of the one thing that he hates more than anything else, criminals. And he's also having prophetic nightmares this entire time that nobody cares about enough to ask him.
Most outstanding people on Nostramo,
Damn,
but in
I
a
would
scheme
ask
to
him.
pay less taxes, the wealthy folks tricked him into
Give
taking
bro a
more
break.
prisoners instead. It was some time before the Night Haunter noticed, as he was swiftly put to work as the Emperor's personal enforcer. He could see as well as anyone that Conrad's need for justice meant he would do anything to destroy criminality wherever it was, and so the 8th Legion swiftly became known for fighting campaigns against rebels, heretics, and dissenters. A Space Marine is a superhuman soldier, a mountain of muscle, wrapped in the finest armor available. They were easily a match for any of humanity's worst nightmares, and so whenever a community decided that they weren't going to pay the Imperial tithe, or didn't want to join the Imperium at all, the 8th was sent in to scare them straight. Eventually, of course...
How about...
That would work on me.
No.
That would work on me.
That is such a fucking image.
That's terrifying.
Primarchs found out that Conrad and his Night Lords
It's
were
just like
fighting
the Darth
terror
Vader hallway
campaigns
bit.
against mostly
Yeah.
civilian populations and demanded he be censured, which he was. The betrayer he felt as the Emperor had berated him for doing, as in his mind, he had been told, was immense. And then, to make matters worse, he discovered the trick played on him by the Nostraman nobility and believed neither his world nor his legion could be saved, and all through this, his nightmares kept getting worse and worse. Hers
Let
wasn't
the man
soldier,
have a
he wasn't
break.
a general, a leader, or a king. He was a killer, with all the powers of a demigod, and even though he had moments where he was able to act like his noble brothers, he ultimately was never able to outrun his nightmares. In the lead up to the Horus Heresy, Conrad began to really deteriorate, and while we have attempted to keep any comments on that story for our next discussion, it shouldn't come as any surprise that the Night Haunter eventually gave in to his demons and turned against the Emperor. Continuing the train.
If he had just been given, like, a therapist or something, he could have been fine.
Like, come on, let this man have a therapist.
Yeah.
If
Oh.
only he talked to Dad.
Right? No, talking to Dad is what made everything worse.
Mm-hmm.
If only he just tried to kill his dad.
He did. That's why he joined Horus in the heresy. He did try to kill his dad, and that didn't work for him either.
He had a valid reason to go to be a heretic.
He did.
He should have just been left in his closet.
Yeah.
Not the closet.
Yeah. And then there's Angron, who's somehow worse.
Oh lord.
And abandoned sons, we have Angron the Red Angel. Like his brother Conrad, Angron never knew peace, even from the very start. The 12th Legion's Primarch landed in the cold mountains of a planet called Nuceria, surviving on his own for a short while before he was attacked by what was
way
likely
too
a
similar to
troop of
Nigeria.
Aldari,
I got
Yeah.
thrown
who
off.
the boy would become and attempted to stop him before he grew any more powerful.
Boo!
Angron was
I
found
blow
after
bubbles
the
at
fighting,
you.
badly wounded and surrounded by alien corpses. The people who found him were not saviors, however, but slavers, who saw this
Oh.
boy as an opportunity
Yeah.
to make some money. Angron was sold into the gladiatorial fight pits and was put to work butchering other people for the crowd.
Jesus.
During this time, his only positive influences were his fellow gladiators who trained him and gave him companionship. As he swiftly grew like all his brothers had, Angron became a crowd favorite and beat anything his masters would throw at him until he was ordered to fight his mentor. Angron flatly refused to harm the man who had been most like a father to him, and so he was given surgery to install a device called the Butcher's Nails. The nails
Worst
are a
torture
type
device.
of passive lobotomy. Probes are inserted into the parts of the brain responsible
You
for
need
rage
a
and attached to
lobotomy.
powered cables that bear a resemblance to dreadlocks. Slowly, these probes amplify the
I can't-
aggression of the victim.
I can't say that on YouTube.
Say it.
Oh no. We can just censor
It
it.
It gave him retard strength.
No.
But it just said that it gave him a lobotomy.
Yeah, that's not what that means.
I blow bubbles at you, Frosty.
Okay. We're gonna back up because this is like right when they talk about something important.
The nails are a type of passive lobotomy. Probes are inserted into the parts of the brain responsible for rage and attached to powered cables that bear a resemblance to dreadlocks. Slowly, these probes amplify the aggression of the victim until their brain can't take the damage anymore and they expire. The nails did their job, sending Angron into a blind fury, and when he awoke, he was surrounded by the cheering crowd while his adopted father lay dead at his feet in the sands of the fight pit. Angron broke then, and with the nails burning into his thoughts, he led a slave revolt, breaking out of the pits and gathering as many gladiators as he could before fleeing into the mountains like a 30k version of Spartacus. They lived there for years, fending off attacks from his former masters, but eventually starvation took its toll, and Angron prepared to die in one last glorious fight with what remained of his gladiator family. In the middle of this final fight, a shimmering teleportation field brought the Emperor himself. He had seen one of his lost sons close to death and had come to save him. "Come with me," he said, "and you will have a legion of soldiers, a long life spent waging war and perfecting your skills." Angron said no, so the Emperor returned to his ship and teleported him anyway. Angron was forced to
Did you
watch
just say
as his
no?
family
You
fought
can't
to
do
the
that.
last without
Yeah,
him,
literally.
and he raged at the Emperor, forcing the Master of Mankind
Ha,
to
you
pin
thought-
him in
you
place
thought
with
you had
his
a
mind.
choice.
Angron asked why
No.
he hadn't saved his gladiators, and the Emperor said he had his sights on bigger things. Angron despaired, saying that he was meant to die with them on Nuceria, and that only a ghost remained. The Emperor said that a ghost would suffice. Never has the Emperor's
Jesus.
cruelty and ruthlessness been on display more than with Angron. The Red Angel was just the first to discover that the Primarchs were not his sons at all, they were simply his favorite tools. Raging and powerless to change his fate, Angron spent months in his new battle barge, killing any space marine from his legion who came to talk to him. The 8th Legion were the Warhounds, an efficient and brutal assault legion with a strong history of success. Regardless, Angron didn't want them and took a man named Karn, the captain of the 8th Company, to calm him down by letting the Primarch talk about his fellow gladiators and their traditions, a rare moment of compassion that would not last. Angron renamed his legion the World Eaters and set about putting his sons through more and more dangerous situations to prove their worthiness. Every time he would challenge them, and every time it wasn't enough. Angron was bitter, and the nails were also slowly killing him. Primarch though he was, nothing could be done to remove them, or so the Emperor claimed, but Angron's advanced physiology made it slow and very painful. Eventually, his sons began making their own versions of the nails in an attempt to show solidarity with their Primarch, but all it did was make him hate them even more. Corvus Corax has a story that somewhat mirrors his brother Conrad. The pod of
It's
the
my
19th
bird boy.
Legion's Primarch came to rest on the airless moon of Lycaeus,
Dad,
a mineral
like
mine
you. And the guy just walks around the corners with 50 nails in his skull.
Hey, all they wanted was to, be recognized.
Well, that hurts.
Angron did kind of spend the first couple years killing everyone who came to talk to him, so it's only fair.
I guess.
the factories of the Forge world it orbited. Like Nostromo, Lycaeus was populated by the poorest and most powerful of the population: criminals, political dissidents, workers who had not met their quotas on the planet below, but instead of turning on each other, these people managed to form a loose community.
It's
And when
dark
the
tide.
pod holding the infant Corax was found by a slave girl, they believed their savior had come. Hiding the child from the guards, the people of Lycaeus raised the boy, and he grew supernaturally fast, just like his brothers had. The people forced to work the mines came from all walks of life, so Corax was taught about philosophy, politics, demolitions, guerrilla warfare. Hell, he probably knew how to cook by the time he was fully grown. Raised to be a leader,
That's a
the
good
young
thing.
Primarch
I love
sought
that-
to work
know how to
together
that-
in
make
rebellion.
food.
I love
He
that
organized
that's
people
like,
into combat
this is the
squads
impressive
disguised as
thing,
work
it's just he
teams,
knows how to cook.
forged his own weapons in concealed dugouts,
Of
and
course,
hid them
it's
across
important to
the
know how to
moon.
cook.
Then he started ordering small attacks to boost recruitment and begin weakening the establishment forces, hitting multiple places to spread out the already thinning garrisons of guards. Once morale was weakened just enough, he ordered the real attack. His forces overran security checkpoints and control bunkers, taking the moon very quickly, but of course, this was hardly his end game because he knew the tech guilds on the Forge world below would strike back at the rebels living on Lycaeus, and when they did, he was ready. Forces from the planet didn't know the moon like the miners did, and at every turn the soldiers were outmaneuvered and destroyed by the rebels. Finally, while they were busily trying to sweep the mines, Corax sidestepped the planetary forces and sent a nuclear charge to each of the 5 major cities on the Forge world using the supply routes that used to bring minerals down from the moon. With the major power bases for the
That
establishment
doesn't
destroyed,
seem like a
the
mineral.
rebellion spread on the planet itself, and the moon was renamed Deliverance
Nah,
in
here's
honor
10
of
tons of
Corax's
uranium,
victory.
bitch.
This is precisely when the Emperor showed up, impressed with his son's
These
ability
minerals
to do so
strangely
much
look
with
like
such little
10
support.
pounds of
Corax
uranium.
agreed to join his father on the condition that he help the rebels stabilize the Forge world, which was now in chaos below. He agreed, of course. This wasn't a request from Angron after all, and called for the Mechanicus to take control of the factories to bring imperial
This wasn't a
order to the
request
planet.
from Angron.
Corax was given
Yep.
the 19th Legion, which he renamed the Raven Guard. Unfortunately, the master of the 19th was not pleased with what he saw. Before his rule, the 19th Legion was a sabotage specialist legion. They operated stealthily and raided rather than fighting battles outright. That part was to Corax's liking, but the 19th also engaged in terror tactics like their brothers in the 8th Legion did, and Corax did not want to become the Night Haunter. So he restructured, ensured his legion would only take missions that involved attacking forces with superior numbers in the defense of civilian populations, and never against them. Very swiftly, he became
Hell yeah.
known as a reliable guerrilla commander, and was generally more liked than Conrad ever was. Mind you, Corax and Horus never ended up getting along, but considering how things worked out, that's probably for the best. How
Yeah.
do we sell in the deepest, darkest part of the dungeons under the Imperial Palace reads Subject 11. Alright, we've kept you waiting this whole time, but now we can finally finish the story of the 20th Primarch and the history of Omegon. Unfortunately, the
Yep.
secrecy is still
Yippee!
a large part of their story, as there is no record of the world where Omegon's pod crash landed. What we do know is that thanks to his soul being shared with his twin Alfarius, Omegon came to understand his nature a lot sooner than most of his brothers, barring Magnus, of course. With this understanding, the young Primarch assaulted some pirates, stole their ship, and took off towards Imperial space. At the same time,
Good job, kid.
Alfarius was leading his Ghost Legion further and further ahead of the main
The
crusade,
ship is mine
working
now.
to soften
Yeah.
targets for the other
Jesus.
legions, of course, but also to search for his brother. It's unclear if the Emperor even knew that Alfarius Omegon was actually a set of twins, as it could have happened when the Chaos Gods stole them away, but they always acted as though he didn't know, so perhaps it's the truth. Regardless, at some point Alfarius finally learned where his twin was, and taking just a squad of his legionnaires with him, went off to find Omegon. The pair immediately recognized each
God
other
damn
and
it.
presumably started
Yep.
watching each other's senses.
That's a good
They talked and
picture,
agreed that
though.
now was the time to reveal themselves to the Imperium and their brothers. Remember, at this point, no one but the Emperor and his advisor Malcador knew Alfarius existed. He had been disguising himself as a normal Space Marine general the entire time. So the two of them planned out exactly how the encounter would go so that it looked as natural as possible. Omegon had built up a little coalition of space pirates or something of that sort, and so, pretending to be the one and only long-lost 20th Primarch, he attacked Aluna Wolf's forward element, trapping the big Imperial warships with just a few tiny fighters. Once Horus stepped in his own flagship, Omegon boarded and killed his way to the bridge before Horus stopped him. Recognizing another Primarch instantly, the War Master stood his men down and declared that the last Primarch had been found. As for his name, when Horus asked, Omegon simply said, "I am Alfarius." The plan had worked brilliantly, and Omegon continued to play the part of Alfarius for a few months, building a bond with Horus before finally meeting the Emperor, who must have thought Alfarius was enjoying some sort of joke. Regardless, the 20th Legion was renamed the
Yep.
Alpha Legion, and off they went.
Yep, the I am
Yeah,
Alfarius came
Hold
from
on,
him.
I need to have Frosty read the spawn egg for this.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The what?
Read what Pyro just gave you.
Wait. Alfarius, maybe. I don't know. That's what he says he is. Spawn egg.
Yeah.
It's the best thing they could have done for the spawn egg.
Yeah. Because the entire thing with the Alpha Legion is everyone claims to be Alfarius, so nobody knows who the real Alfarius is. I don't even think they know who the real
I don't
Alfarius
know.
is.
I could be. I mean, this could be him, or
Yeah, I mean, this could be him. I don't know. They all say that they are.
but it also probably isn't.
Yeah, it also probably isn't.
How much he disliked the way the Alpha Legion fought, to his eyes completely disorganized and making use of
Memes.
non-Astartes operatives. This stung
The Alpha
Alfarius,
Legion
as
is
he
just
believed his way
full
of
of
warfare
memes.
was every bit as effective as Gilliman's rigid
I could tell.
The
organizations
meme legion.
and battle plans.
No,
So
that's
he
the
pushed
Blood
his legion
Ravens.
harder and harder, making more convoluted battle plans and using loose formations and cells of his
Oh,
marines
wait.
to weaken an enemy
Actually, no,
long
wait.
before the main army ever reached them. Alfarius and Omegon may have been latecomers to the Crusades, but they performed some of the most masterful executions of enemy forces out of any legion. The Alpha Legion was also the last of the 3 Trefoil legions we mentioned previously, and their special purpose could not be more clear. Designed to be independent thinkers and to have small numbers so as to force them
Independent
to adapt and
thinking?
use human
In
operatives
my
to supplement
Imperium?
forces, the Alpha Legion was always
You
meant
can't
to
do
be
that!
the spies
Exactly.
of the Legiones Astartes. And so even when things began to fall apart and their brothers began picking sides, Alfarius and Omegon kept their cool and began making plans. They would ensure that humanity would survive. Thank you all so much for coming along with our exploration into the origins of the Emperor's sons. It is not an exaggeration to say that this part of 40k's lore has become the most expansive and developed, covering stories of amazing and not so amazing quality. The Black Library has published over 50 main novels in the Horus Heresy series alone, with more books covering other aspects,
Oh.
including one for each Primarch on their own. For our part, it felt right to put out this brief introduction of each Primarch before
Yeah,
diving
brief.
into the
This was
story
an
of their
hour and
downfall,
17
so
minutes.
We hope you enjoyed this discussion because the
Goddamn.
conclusion
Hey, it's
is
Engron.
on its way.
Brief
Just
my
be sure to
ass.
subscribe and ring that bell
I mean,
so
it
that you
is
don't miss
very-
the next more lore.
Very shortened compared to the books.
Yes, dear God,
So
it is.
anyway,
Now I
I'm still
need.
laughing at the one where it's like, yes, my most adept son being a psyker, I'm gonna tell him not to mess with the warp.
Yeah.
It's like the test of putting a kid in a room by themselves with a plate of marshmallows and being like,
Yeah.
don't eat the marshmallow.
Yeah. Except the kid usually gets something better after.
Yeah.
Magnus
Not
just
this
got.
time.
Yeah, Magnus just got nothing. We now have the history of the chapters. Get back in here. We have more to do. we went through the Primarchs. Now we go through their legions. Alright. Let us begin.
One day, a god decides it's time to bring humanity back into the stars and creates giant superhuman soldiers in a basement on Terra that would be known as Space
In a
Marines.
fucking
The 20
basement.
legions
Essentially,
of these
yeah.
super soldiers will struggle with their identities, their purpose, their faith, and ultimately, each other. And each of these legions is unique in ways you
I'm gonna
wouldn't
turn it down a
believe.
bit.
So, welcome to our breakdown of the 20 legions of the Adeptus Astartes from
That's better.
Warhammer 40k.
Frosty, can you still hear it?
We might as well start
Yeah.
at number
Okay.
1. The first Legion Astartes is also coincidentally one of the most celebrated despite their habit of secrecy. Often tasked with some of the most important and high-profile missions, the Dark Angels enjoyed much of the spotlight during the Great Crusade. Their first recorded deployment was the defense of the Imperial Palace during the Palace coup attempt during the Unification Wars. Many of the first legionnaires of what would eventually become the Dark Angels were used to experiment fighting styles and organizational techniques to be used in the other legions. This led to an air of superiority that hung over the first in every encounter
God
with their
damn it.
fellow legions,
Yep.
leading
You all
to the
think you're
unofficial
better than
nickname,
me.
the Uncrowned Princes.
Yep.
Many First Legion warriors started taking names of epic heroes from Terran myth as they slowly started believing their own hype. However, this led them to start believing that there was nothing they could learn from the rest of the Imperium or even their brother Space Marines. And so,
Shit.
by the time their Primarch Lionel Johnson
Damn
was
it.
found, the first was a legion of secretive and superior traditionalists ruled by a circle of pseudo-nobility called hosts. Oddly, the prideful leaders of the Legion did not at first enjoy the presence of their Primarch like other
Oddly.
legions did, and it took quite a few duels for the Lion to beat some sense
wonder
into
why,
this
man.
group of Astartes. And unfortunately, this feeling of bitterness and wounded pride became a festering undercurrent of heresy that came to a head when Horus attacked the Imperium. The legionnaires that had still shown resistance
Somebody
to the
say
Lion and his new
heresy.
tactics
Yep.
had been sent to guard their home world of Caliban
Fuck
and were very
this.
upset about the perceived slight against their honor. In a
It's like a
final
Snickers
act of
commercial,
rebellion,
but
these
snapping the
Marines would
spine of
become
a heretic.
the Fallen, turned
Mhm.
against the Imperium, forcing the Lion to destroy most of
Bad
Caliban and
tape.
fighting his
Snap a
former best friend
heretic.
Luther. Heavily wounded,
Works for the
Primarchs
Minotaurs.
slept for over 10 millennia until waking up during the Indomitus Crusade. Currently, the Dark Angels are one of the strongest Space Marine chapters, working in concert with their successor chapters better than any other legion, all while hunting down what remains of their fallen brothers in secret. That's weird. All it says here is Error 404, Legion not found.
Remain where you are. The
Well,
Inquisitors are
on
on
to
their
the
way.
next one, I
Fucking
guess.
run.
A legion
Jesus.
diminished by the near
Shit,
total loss
shit,
of its gene
ah,
seed, the
Yep.
Emperor's children were a faint
Do you know
echo
of the
the
Silver
other legions
Knights?
by the time Fulgrim was
No?
found and
Good.
given command.
Exactly.
Driven by his personal need to prove himself as the perfect son of the Emperor and his compulsive need for efficiency,
Oh, wait, hold on. I completely forgot. Before we moved on to this, I was going to send Frosty a thing.
Oh god.
Oh no. Anyway,
I sent
anyone
you a
want some
thing.
beef Wellington.
I did see that.
Yeah, I pulled that while we were talking, like
Hmm.
at the very start.
Nice. Let's see. Where is it? Here it is.
If you two are down, after this I have a mod pack with also I think just this mod in.
I
I could
need.
send you guys the
Yeah.
code for it.
I
You
need.
just do
I,
like a little survival one.
I need to edit this.
No, that shouldn't take long.
It's going to take a while,
Yeah, it's gonna be what,
Frosty.
2-hour long footage.
at least.
Fair. Frosty, would you like to do the Minecraft one with me?
Huh?
Fulgrim drove his legion
Would
to
you
like to
never
do the
waste resources or
mod pack
energy,
with me?
creating some of the most obsessed
Maybe.
Marines in the Imperium. For some time
I'll
after
take it.
Fulgrim took command,
Ooh,
the Third
purple.
Legion
Suki would
wasn't
like
able
that.
to take part in many
Yeah,
of
but
the
they're
more
heretics.
glorious and notable campaigns of the Great Crusade as they worked to replenish
We'll
their
just steal their
numbers.
armor.
Once they were ready, however,
No.
they
Blood
proved
Ravens would do.
overeager and ended up
Yeah.
volunteering for challenges that would stress even the more
I mean, they
better
steal from the
legions.
custodies. That
Saw
makes
a
sense.
fucking
Exposed them to the
skit
taint of
where the
chaos
Blood
early
Ravens
on,
straight up
and by the time
stole
the
the
heresy was being
Emperor.
planned,
You sent
the
that to
Emperor's
me.
children and their Primarch had
I
almost
know.
been fully
It was
taken
funny.
by the ruinous powers. The Emperor's children and their Primarch were manipulated at almost every step of the way. Horus saw his inexperienced and eager young brother as a useful tool, even leveraging his relationship with Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands Legion in an attempt to get yet another legion on his side. For his part, Fulgrim is depicted as being mostly naive, but we shouldn't forget that he is a Primarch, a superhuman warrior with a huge wrinkly brain and tons of ambition, and his legion was very much the same, a fact that the Prince of Excess exploited with gusto.
brain has so
Masters
many
of siege
wrinkles.
warfare,
Yep.
these implacable
And then there's the
warriors
Blood
were
Claws,
often
whose
more
brains are
stubborn than the
completely smooth.
fortresses they garrisoned. Making matters worse, their
Smoother than
Primarch
a baby's
Perturabo
bottom.
was a
Yeah,
strict
yeah, actually.
instituting decimation as a punishment whenever the Legion
I wouldn't be
failed to
surprised
measure
if their
up to
brains
his
are
high
just
standards,
spheres.
which thankfully wasn't often. Choosing
It's
one
just
out
a
of
rubber
every 10
ball.
of your friends to be beaten to death is a strong motivator to not make mistakes, it seems. The real problem for the Iron Warriors
You know what?
was
That checks
they were
out.
too good at what they did.
Being
Long,
beat-
protracted
being beaten.
sieges and trench warfare are difficult.
That checks out. Being beaten to death is a strong motivator to not make a mistake.
You know what I,
That'll
you know
do
what I
it.
just thought of?
What?
But you know what what I was saying earlier, how the inside of their brain would just be like a bounce or like a rubber ball.
Hmm.
Just every time they start thinking, you hear like that, like the dodgeball sound effect.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it slowly gets faster the more they realize something.
Yep.
The dodgeball sounds are getting louder.
Yep.
What the? God damn it! Who broke the TV?
I didn't. I was in my inventory.
Frosty.
I have my
Frosty.
hand nowhere near my mouse.
I was in my
Actually,
inventory.
no. I have a touchpad. I think I bumped my knuckle against that.
God damn it, Frosty!
That's the
What?
back of the
That's it.
TV. Wait, what?
Put it against the wall, bottom block. God shit! Oh my god!
There we go.
There
Okay.
you go! God damn!
Your instructions
So,
were
Frosty, that's for-
insanely.
Fuck!
The TV.
Yep.
He just.
I will
I
run
don't know
into
what
this house,
happened. He
guns
just-
ablazing.
Okay.
Oh shit!
You'll have to
Uh-oh.
rebuild it.
Oh, Oh.
Please no! I don't want to
I
rebuild
opened
the
my
house.
inventory on accident. Okay.
Now I have to
I don't want to
get...
rebuild this house again.
Oh,
Frosty.
I don't
No.
even know how this thing
Please.
works.
Good. Keep it that
Okay.
way.
Okay, that's how it works. Anyways,
One day, a god
Oh god,
Okay.
he's burning the tank. Well, the eventual tank.
Okay. Get in here.
wait.
Behave yourselves.
Ah, God!
Why can't you all just behave yourselves?
I'm trying
No, you're not.
hard.
Sit down. Thank
You're a
you.
father to 2 children.
I'm a
I
salamander
hope
with
not.
ADHD. I don't
Making
stay
matters
still.
worse, their Primarch Perturabo was
my
a
God.
strict
Oh.
disciplinarian,
Sorry.
instituting decimation as a punishment whenever the Legion failed to measure up to his high standards, which thankfully wasn't often. Choosing one
Fucking
out
ears,
of every
man.
10 of your friends to be beaten
That's
to
what you
death
get.
is a strong motivator to not make mistakes, it seems. The real problem for the Iron Warriors was that they were too good at what they did. Long, protracted
When has that
sieges
ever been
and
a
trench
problem?
warfare are difficult for any soldier.
Apparently it is
And though
now.
Space Marines are superhuman in many
Boredom.
ways, they're built for quick, decisive
True.
strikes, not drawn-out warfare. The Iron Warriors, though, took these assignments on without complaining so often that they got themselves pigeonholed into the role. Whenever a tough enemy had dug in, the Emperor sent the Iron Warriors to blast them out. Whenever a fortress needed guarding by more than just human infantry, he called on the Iron Warriors. This slowly bred resentment and bitterness in the Legion, and especially its Primarch, who began to get envious of the praise and honors heaped on his more noteworthy brothers. When the time came and Horus
suck.
approached him about the
Yeah.
possibility of fighting the Emperor and his upstart loyalist brothers,
Why couldn't you be more
Perturabo
like
and
your
his
brothers?
legion didn't
You won't
hesitate
let
to
me.
say yes.
Exactly.
Although they remain to this day one of only 2
Like the
traitor
Iron
legions
Warriors were
who
the middle
staunchly
child.
refused
You know, yeah, that's exactly it.
Gods of Chaos. The 5th Legion is one of the very few examples of Astartes forces who operated relatively the same before and after the introduction of their Primarch. Originally called the Star Hunters, these Astartes were not often found in the grand battles of the Unification Wars or the Great Crusade, being instead held back for use as scouts and hunters, tracking down enemies of the Emperor for other legions to destroy. Not that the 5th Legion was incapable of fighting campaigns on their own, as their war record during the Great Crusade would attest, but their hit-and-run tactics were better suited for smaller-scale fights, and while effective, the other legions thought very little of their brothers from the 5th. And while this image of the Star Hunters didn't change much after their Primarch Jagatai was found, the newly renamed White Scars began to pick up more culture and pride than they had ever enjoyed. This is because while Jagatai inherited a legion that was already capable of fighting in a style to which he was accustomed, they were hollow, joyless men in desperate need of something to enrich themselves. Jagatai ordered each Marine to take up a hobby. Calligraphy, painting, storytelling, needlepoint, anything to let the Marines of the White Scars feel
Make a
a
hobby!
little bit less like mindless killing
kit
machines.
building.
And it worked. The White Scars
Playing
kept to their
Warhammer
duties
and
and
Warhammer.
stayed hunting down the enemies
It
of
is
the
very
Imperium
nice.
without word of complaint. And when the time came for them to choose a side in the heresy, they stuck with the Loyalists and hunted down their traitorous former allies. It's even a tradition that has persisted to this day, with the Great Hunts of the Khans regularly finding and dispatching some of the deadliest enemies of the throne. The Rout, the Vilca Fenrica, the Space Wolves, the
Yes!
6th Legion Astartes
It's
has
the
had
Space
several
Puppies.
names across its history, and it's been quite
I
a
will
bloody
pet
one.
them.
One of these so-called Trefoil Legions,
No.
the 6th was made for a very
Don't
specific
pet the
purpose,
Vikings.
to kill other
Hey,
You
some
want
of
me
it-
to pet you? This is a
the
threat.
relatively
Some of
small
them might
size
like
of the
it.
Legion was due in large part to the volatility of their gene seed,
I
a
doubt it.
precaution that the Emperor baked in just in case his
Yeah, they're
favorite
chill.
executioners
I do really
ever
like
decided
Space
to
Wolves.
turn
They're
on him.
cool.
Not that it made any
They're very
difference to
cool.
their
I really like
effectiveness. During the unification
Suki also
war in
really
the
likes
early
them.
Great Crusade, the 6th Legion was
Well, no
only
shit.
unleashed when
It
the
also might
Emperor
be
wanted
'cause
to
we're
make a
furries.
point, or
Maybe.
he needed a problem dealt with.
Yeah,
The
why do
war
you think
might
they're
have
always
a
salad?
slight
gained
factor
a
to this.
reputation for being some of the most savage fighters in the Imperium, a fact that worked well to keep potential traitors in line. Two very important things happened to the 6th Legion during the Great Crusade. Their Primarch, Leman Russ, was found, the Wolf King renaming his legion to the Space Wolves, and at some point the Wolves were called upon to fulfill their intended role as the Emperor's executioners, killing the Primarchs of the 2nd and 11th Legions and mauling the surviving Marines so badly that none dare speak of the 2 lost legions ever again. It was these acts that led to the
Damn.
other Primarchs rightfully fearing Russ and his legion. It was said that out of every Primarch, only the Lion could have stood against the Wolf in combat, a thought that was tested in the bitter feuds the 2 Primarch had over the years. The problem with this reputation, of course, was that the Legionnaires of the 6th and their Primarch never really gained a close relationship with their peers. It's hard to trust someone who you know would kill you as easily as they would drink with you, should the Emperor command it at least. This was taken to its extreme during the Heresy, when Horus successfully tricked the Wolves into attacking the Thousand Sons with some false orders, which kept them from helping their allies on Terra during the siege. To this day, the Wolves are known for being some of the most incredibly deadly warriors in the galaxy and are not above fighting other Imperials who step out of line. Out of all the Space Marine legions, only the 7th has claim to Terra as its official homeworld. The Imperial Fists established themselves early on as excellent defense troops, being proficient in the building of defenses and the nuances of a more aggressive defense style that lent itself very well to the abilities of a Space Marine force. This changed very little once they were reunited with their Primarch Rogel Dorn. Dorn was staunchly loyal and favored uncomplicated,
So they just put their
straightforward
stat points
approaches
into
to
defense.
every
Got it.
problem.
Pretty much, yeah.
Under his stewardship, the Imperial Fist Legion became as
They
well known
will
for
pass
their
the
heavy
vigor
assault tactics
check.
as they
Yep.
were for their ability to defend.
They build the
This
best
led them to be used
sandcastles,
quite
I gotta
often
tell you.
as the
SpongeBob would
Emperor's
be
blunt
proud.
Instrument, either breaking sieges that had held on for too long, or defending desperate last stands that the Emperor could not afford to lose. In this way, the Imperial Fists gained a rivalry with the Iron Warriors, the latter of which became very
Yep,
bitter
there we
that
go.
the Fists often received honors for the daring actions that they were assigned to, while they themselves were often relegated to fighting the longer, less exciting parts of those same sieges. For his part, Dorn seemed completely uninterested in that sort of rivalry, thinking only of his duty to the Imperium. It was Dorn who constructed the imposing defenses of the Imperial
Bro's got his
Palace on
priorities,
Terra,
though.
and it
Yeah.
was Dorn who accompanied the Emperor onto Horus's battle barge
He does
at
what
the
he's told.
climax of the siege. His inability to stop the deaths of both his brother Sanguinius and the Emperor very nearly broke him, and while he very nearly came to blows with his brother Guilliman in the aftermath, he eventually decided it was best to keep what was left of the Imperium together. Today, the Imperial Fists and their successor chapters fight as roving armies, crusading from one system to the next, never settling down. So while the Fists claim Holy Terra as their home world, their real headquarters is their ancient mobile battle station called the Phalanx. The 8th Legion, the Night Lords, are one of the most controversial of the Astartes forces, and that's saying something. The Emperor had his executioners to deal with traitors, and his spies and his scouts, all roles useful for warfare on a galactic
The
scale.
Night Lords are some of the coolest looking Marines.
Like any tyrant,
oh god, not again!
was worried about the masses of people rising up in revolt. No matter how many Marines he made,
Every time I see that
many
picture, I'm just gonna
campaigns
think,
he fought, the trillions and trillions of people in the new Imperium would always outnumber his armies.
This is Batman with no moral code.
Energy putting out the fires of revolution instead of conquering the enemies
Batman
of
with
humanity.
fucking space marine armor would be so scary.
Yeah.
I was
The
born
legionnaries
in
of
it.
the 8th
That's literally
Legion
Conrad
are
Kurz in a nutshell.
not like the Space Wolves, who were so terrifying in combat
Yeah.
that other warriors would know that they couldn't win. The Night Lords would cut your power and creep in dark shadows. They would take over.
I mean, prove me wrong, though.
I can't.
Sounds so defeated.
It's because I said it, and then I immediately was like, God damn it, it just fits perfectly.
It really does.
Oh, fuck was that?
Pyro.
Nothing.
Pyro, sit down.
I did sit down.
And blare the screams of the dying
Pyro
to the
sit down?
rest of the populace.
Frosty
They
was
would
the one who got
flay
up.
people and leave them to be
I thought you
found
both
in
got
the
up.
town square. They fought
God damn
dirty,
it. Oh, so you were gonna tell
They made
me
the
off and
idea
not
of
Frosty?
fighting
What
the
the fuck,
Imperium
man? This is
No,
fake.
no,
It
I was gonna
wasn't
tell
long
him
before
to.
the other Primarchs took a stand. And
No,
here is probably the biggest instance of cowardice by the Emperor himself. It's very clear that the Emperor created the Night Lords to be this way and encouraged them, ordered them to act like this. Just like with Angron of the World Eaters, the Emperor knew that the Primarch of the 8th, Conrad Kurz, was racked with mental instability brought on by conditions that might have
He
been
has
curable,
mental
but chose
trauma.
to do
He does.
nothing and disavow the Night Lords when it became known that they committed acts of terror, even and especially upon the citizens of the Imperium. Needless to say that the Night Lords decided to work with Horus and the other traitors when the time came, even though they never accepted worship of the Chaos Gods. Their only goal post-heresy has seemingly been to tear down the rotting edifice of the Imperium that betrayed them. Originally designed as one of a handful of shock troop armies, the legion that would become the Blood Angels were often deployed either as the very tip of the Emperor's spear or wherever a stubborn enemy needed to be wiped out wholesale. It was a job the 9th Legion excelled at, often replenishing lost Marines with new stock taken from their enemies, and in this way the Legion gained a reputation for returning from dangerous campaigns with the same number of Marines it had departed with. But that wasn't the only rumor. All Marines are capable of eating flesh to gain information or emergency sustenance, but the 9th Legion became known for...
They can eat the flesh of any creature and gain its memories. Because that's just a normal thing you need for warfare, I guess.
Ritualistically eating their slain foes after battle.
I wouldn't eat Tyranid flesh if I were you. You don't want to gain all those memories.
Push them further from the rest of the Imperium as they were shunned and slowly began
No,
to
they're just a
evolve
hive mind.
into feral murderers. And then Sanguinius was found. The angelic Primarch had grown up on the world of Baal, and when he was given his legion, the incredibly psychic Primarch instantly felt a connection to his gene sons. Instead of demanding they swear an oath to him, Sanguinius swore an oath to them. They would either rise together or fall together. Under his leadership, the Blood Angels went from pariahs to one of the most decorated assault legions in the Imperium. It's no surprise then that the Marines of the Blood Angels Legion had the strongest bond with their Primarch, only strengthened by his psychic abilities. When Horus slew Sanguinius aboard his ship at the climax of the Siege of Terra, the entire legion broke, succumbing to an illness which would become known as the Black Rage. As the rage takes hold, afflicted Marines begin to believe they are Sanguinius, facing down their treacherous brother Horus, and dying. No one knows how or when it will affect a Blood Angels Marine,
Honestly,
but the effects
dying
are
is just
almost
a skill issue
always
in general.
irreversible, with notable exceptions. Today, the Blood
God.
Angels are one of the strongest chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, but the rage still afflicts them, forcing Blood Angels leadership to place their raving comrades into doomed squads called the Death Company, so that they might seek their end in battle. The 10th Legion had always been as relentless as their Primarch, even before Ferrus Manus was found. Called the Stormwalkers during the Unification Wars, the 10th Legion had a very simple, straightforward approach to warfare, not unlike the warriors of the Death Guard. In fact, by the beginning of the Great Crusade, it was apparent that the Stormwalkers had gained an affinity for using heavy vehicles and mobile artillery pieces to simply advance towards an enemy until it wasn't a problem anymore. This hardly changed when Ferrus Manus was given the Legion, and it was named the Iron Hands in honor of the Primarch's literal metal hands. What Manus really brought to his Legion was a need to purge weakness. The warriors of the 10th became known for using their advanced machinery to turn aside enormous enemy armies,
those are
breaking
weapons.
overwhelming forces with their technology. The
Just
Marines
6
of this Legion
bolters
would
for
also
one
make
hand.
extensive use of bionic replacements for limbs, as the sort of fighting
Gotta
they were
love that.
used to often led to mangled soldiers. This led to the Legion having a much stronger working relationship with the Tech Priests of Mars compared to other legions. This affinity for machines, coupled with their belief that the flesh is weak, led to some dire consequences after the heresy began. Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus had been some of the closest friends out of all the Primarchs, but when Fulgrim tried to get Manus to join the traitors,
Best
the stoic
buds.
Iron Hands Primarch tried to kill him. When they finally met
Damn.
again on the battlefield, neither man could kill the other until Fulgrim in his grief gave himself to the demon in his sword, and Manus was decapitated. The Iron Hands shattered, with different factions following various captains on missions of vengeance. This almost destroyed what was left of the Legion, with factions blaming
No,
the
they're not
traitors
Batman.
for their cowardice, their allies for their lack of strength, and even blaming
Everyone's
Manus
Batman
and
in
the Iron Hands
40K.
captains for indulging in their emotions. Seeking to purge this weakness, the remaining
Okay.
Iron Hands became cold, calculating fighters who want nothing more than
I know,
to purge
we're
the
funny.
weakness of humanity. There has been some pushback against the doctrine recently, but the Iron Hands remain ruthlessly emotionless as a whole. Sorry, your Legion is in another castle. What's going on? There can't be 2 missing legions, can there? The 12th Legion was born as the Warhounds, and
Damn.
immediately established themselves as an effective assault force. Their discipline in training and combat deployments was similar to legions like the Luna Wolves or the early Blood Angels, but their aggression and ferocity once engaged in combat was much closer to the disposition of the Space Wolves. The Emperor even kept the Warhounds in reserve for much of the Unification War in case he needed to keep other legions in line, again, not unlike the Space Wolves. However, early in the Great Crusade, the prison colony on the asteroid Cerberus rose up in revolt, led by a small group of Thunder Warriors who had somehow survived the purges. Having no other legion nearby, the Emperor sent in the 12th, and the Warhounds went to work. The invasion began at 0300 hours, and by 0808, the all-clear was given by the Warhounds' commander. After being asked what the state of the prisoners was, the commander replied that he had not been ordered to take any. And from then on, the Legion was used as the premier assault group of the Imperium and was embedded
5
in
hours
the
to take
13th
out an
Expeditionary
entire
Fleet,
regiment
working
of Thunder
alongside
Warriors.
elements of the Imperial Army. And it was
Oh.
under these conditions that the 12th Legion was reunited with their Primarch Angron, who was angry about being ripped away from his gladiator family and decided
Guess
to
the name
kill a
fits
bunch
that.
of his Marines about it.
Mhm.
Eventually, they calmed down, but the rest of the history of this legion is centered around them trying and failing to gain approval of their angry Gene father. They changed their name to the World Eaters. They began to act more
Uh-oh,
recklessly in their
Daddy's
assault
angry.
actions. They started getting implants
That is
similar to
literally his whole
Angron's
thing.
that drove them insane with rage, and none of it worked. When their Primarch sided with Horus because of his unfair and frankly cruel treatment at the hands of the Emperor, the World Eaters obediently followed him right into damnation. The mighty 13th Legion Astartes began as the Warborn, a legion whose gene seed was noted for its high
Ooh, the
adaptability,
Ultramarines.
leading
These are
to
the
the
basic
legion
bitch
becoming the
ones.
home
Everyone
of
knows these guys.
refugees
Yep.
instead of taking its recruits from a specific
boys.
cultural area
Yeah.
of Old Terra. This would be a reoccurring pattern, as they would begin by taking in recruits from the defeated enemies of the Emperor on Earth, and eventually take in the loyal Marines of censured or lost legions during the heresy. Well suited to the work of a backbone force, The 13th Legion gradually became known as a competent campaigning legion, often taking on whole war zones without support from other legions. This worked well with the leadership style of their Primarch Rabute Guilliman, who was adept at not only the business of persecuting wars, but administrating afterwards. The Legion's name was changed to the Ultramarines, and so began one of the most successful careers of any Legion during the Great Crusade. Maybe it was Guilliman's excellent organizational mind, or the ease at which his Legion took to things like diplomacy and logistics, but
Or the
either
power
way,
of Microsoft
the Ultramarines
Excel.
conquered more worlds than any Legion except
this
the
gun they
Lunawolves,
found.
and their
That too.
numbers swelled to easily eclipse any of the other Astartes armies. There are rumors that this sudden swell of Ultramarine recruits is due to, okay, I know I just had the notes for this section, and now they're not here. Okay, we'll move on for now, but if I find that passage, I'll circle back. Being the largest legion by far,
Damn.
Horus knew he had to
If you
keep
find
the
that passage, you're
Ultramarines
dead.
away from
Yes.
Terra, or his siege would be
You should not have
stopwatched.
found it in the
So
first
he
place.
threw large elements of the
Yep.
Word Bearers, World Eaters, Alpha Legion, and even the Night Lords at their home system of Makraj in order to keep them fighting there instead of in Sol. And the numbers of the Ultramarines is still a huge factor in their operations today, with the chapter having more splinter armies than any other original legion. The Ultramarines literally wrote the book on the Astartes, and love them or hate them, they are one of the most effective forces in the galaxy. A legion built on resilience, the 14th Legion, or the Dusk Raiders as they were called at the beginning, were tough even by Astartes standards. Oddly, they began as an ambush force, striking at dusk as their name implies, and making extensive use of heavier armor types so that they could simply walk into enemy fire for maximum intimidation. The Dusk
Yeah,
Raiders
because
fought
that's
like
an
this for
effective
over
strategy to
8
live.
decades into the Great Crusade before Mortarion,
Yeah,
their
sure.
Primarch, was found. Himself a stoic, tough fighter, Mortarion recognized his new legion as agents of the inevitable and renamed them the Death Guard. Their way of fighting subtly switched around this time to attrition-style combat, their already tough physiques lending themselves extra protection in battlefields with harsh environmental conditions. In some places that were poisonous or devoid of atmosphere, the warriors of the 14th were sent to show the enemies of humanity that the Emperor would not be turned aside by anything. This led the Legion to fight mostly as foot sloggers, rarely using transports, bikes, or jump packs like other legions did, and instead simply advancing on foot in both power armor and Terminator armor. Mortarion only really became
Love
close
that.
with Horus, and so even before the heresy began, it was very likely that he would have fought for his brother against the Emperor. But it should be noted that not all his legionnaires felt the same, and if it was not for Nathaniel Garo and the flight of the Eisenstein, the loyal forces of the Imperium would not have known about Horus's treachery until it was too late to stop him. And while Mortarion originally had no intentions of lowering himself to worshipping the powers of chaos, the Great Unclean One had other plans and marooned Mortarion's fleet in a pocket of the warp. The destroyer
Here
plague
it is.
tore through his marines, maiming and torturing them until Mortarion pledged himself to Nurgle just to stop the pain. When the Death Guard finally arrived at Terra, the bloated forms of the new Death Guard were terrifying and nearly unkillable. Mortarion himself ascended to demonhood and plagues the Imperium to this day. The Thousand Sons are probably one of the most tragic stories in the Imperium. They were originally formed
Yeah.
from recruits born inside the Emperor's lands on Terra, and so many hadn't suffered war much before the Unification Wars. They were the sons of nobility already loyal to the Emperor, and many had been educated in some manner before volunteering. They were formed by the Emperor himself as the Unification Wars were coming to a close, and exactly 1,000 carefully picked student aspirants were the foundation of the 15th Legion. Aside from their beginnings, the Astartes of the Thousand Sons weren't particularly notable how they fought or were organized until they started developing psychic powers. And while the curious Marines of the 15th were at first happy about this development, it very quickly spiraled out of control. At this point in history, not many people in the Imperium knew about the warp and the chaotic powers within, and that was by design. Starving the Chaos Gods of attention was an effective way of robbing their power. The warriors of the Thousand Sons did not know this and began to horrifically mutate. As they slowly
Shit.
brought the outbreaks under control, other Primarchs like Mortarion and Rogel Dorn became aware of the Psykers in the 15th Legion and pushed to have them censured. No mutant should be allowed in the Emperor's forces. But the 15th Legion couldn't help but learn more, and so continued in secret, especially after being reunited with their Primarch Magnus, whose psychic might was second only to the Emperor's. He stabilized the mutations and reorganized the Legion into chapters, a term which would eventually be used for every Astartes force. Upsettingly, it was Magnus's attempt to warn the Emperor about Horus that got his legion almost destroyed by the Space Wolves, who were forced to deal with the Thousand Sons for breaking the rules about using psychic powers, even if it was to warn the Emperor. Now on the run from the Imperium, the 15th Legion had no choice but to hide in the warp, which brought the mutations back. Desperate chapter leaders attempted a complicated spell, at the cost of turning their bodies to dust.
We're almost done.
1,000 Marines are now barely sentient, and their forces traveled the galaxy on mysterious missions for their god Tzeentch, and to find a cure. Mirroring the rise and fall of their Primarch Horus Lupercal, the 16th Legion started out as one of the Emperor's most trusted forces. The Terran recruits were formed from wandering tribes known for pragmatism and independence, making the bulk of the original 16th Legion into fierce and effective shock troops. It was this quality which led the Emperor to choose them from the pacification of Luna, a battle which captured the genetic laboratories that the Emperor needed to complete his Space Marine program. As a reward, the 16th Legion was named the Luna Wolves, and given much of the first batches of Gene Seed, making them one of the strongest legions even before the Great Crusade started. And that hardly changed when Horus was found on the very nearby world of Chthoniya. Horus was actually the very first Primarch to be discovered, and for 30 years was the only Primarch, leading him to gaining not only a very strong bond with his legion, but also the Emperor, and to some extent the whole Imperium. He was the Emperor's favorite son. We spoke earlier about how being the first legion gave the Dark Angels a bit of an ego. Imagine being the only legion with a Primarch for 3 decades, and that Primarch being the obvious favorite among his brothers. Needless to say, the Luna Wolves were a bit puffed up. During the Great Crusade, the 16th Legion pushed themselves to conquer more worlds, pursue more enemies, fight more glorious wars, and win more accolades than their fellow legions. Only the Ultramarines even came close. Then came Ulanor. The Ulanor Crusade was a defining moment for the Imperium as a whole, but the Luna Wolves more than most. The largest Orc empire was destroyed as the Emperor himself took to the field for the final time during the Great Crusade, leaving for a mysterious project under the Terran surface and proclaiming Horus the War Master, Supreme Commander of Imperial forces, second only to the Emperor himself. When he left, the Emperor suggested that Horus rename his legion to reflect his new position, and though he originally refused, he began to think the other Primarchs still saw him just as a peer, and so he relented, and the 16th Legion became the Sons of Horus. What happened soon after is a story for another video, but Horus was infected by the powers of chaos thanks in part to the scheming of his brother Lorgar of the Wordbearers, and the slow slide into heresy began.
You really don't like him.
After
No, I
the
don't.
climactic battle with the Emperor during the Siege of Terra, what was
Is
left
that
of the
bad?
Sons of Horus
He's
rallied
the reason
around
the
their former
heresy
first captain,
happened.
Abaddon, and renamed themselves the
fuck,
Black
man?
Legion. The story of the 17th Legion is a strange one, but that's fitting considering they're the most direct cause of
He's
the
the
Horus
reason Dad
heresy.
sits in his chair all
Originally
day.
named the Imperial Heralds,
What?
the 17th Legion was made up of the sons of defeated enemies
Emperor
on
being their dad,
Terra,
he has to
and
sit
were
on his
raised
throne.
to understand the crimes of their parents, a connection that no other
Man, that
Space
missed.
Marine was allowed to keep.
No, I
during
thought you said
occupation.
they're the reason I sit in my
This
chair
had the
all day.
effect of making the Marines
No.
of the 17th
I
much
said
more
they're the reason
zealous in
Dad
their
sits in his
pursuit of
chair
their
all day.
orders
Ah.
and the Imperial truth, the working doctrine of the Imperium,
Yes,
which
that is
favored
correct.
logic and reason above all else. To go along with this, the 17th Legion were the official emissaries of the Emperor, delivering his ultimatums to potential enemies by a single Marine in black armor, a skull helmet, and a winged mace. That's right, the 17th Legion invented Space Marine chaplains. Things took a turn, however, when their Primarch was discovered. Lorgar Aurelian was raised to be a devout man and believed very strongly that religion was a fundamental part of being human. Which would be a nice sentiment if his two most devoted advisors hadn't been worshippers of chaos before they had been made into Astartes.
Yeah,
United with his
that
legion,
kind of throws a
Lorgar
wrench in
renamed
things.
them the Word Bearers and began twisting the imperial truth
It throws
into
more
a true
than
religion
a
with
wrench.
the emperor
Throws
at
the
its
entire
center.
A
toolbox.
Wherever they
sledgehammer.
went, they built shrines to the master of
Just chuck the
humanity,
entire
until
toolbox in there.
finally,
You might
the
as well.
emperor had enough. He
Like,
was
not
going
even the
to sick
handheld one, it's
Space
the
Wolves on
giant
them,
rolling one
removing
that you keep in a
Fucking
shop.
worshiping
Yep.
the
me.
2nd and 11th Legions, but the other Primarchs convinced him to show leniency, and so the Ultramarines were ordered to level the Wordbearers' capital city, and they were made to kneel in the ash and repledge themselves to the Imperial truth. And that was all that was needed. Lorgar's advisors told him that there were other gods more worthy of his worship, and so the first Primarch slid into chaos worship and began planning to corrupt his greatest brother, Horus.
And he did.
Today, the Wordbearers continue this sort of work, seeding cults in Imperial territory and furthering the worship of the ruinous powers. The second of the most carefully and secretly made legions, the 18th Legion, had a very specific purpose like the Space Wolves and the Alpha Legion. These Marines and the special changes to their gene seed were kept secret even from the other legions for quite some time. For the 18th Legion, this purpose was to be the heroes of humanity. Kept in reserve for most of
Didn't
the
really
Unification
pan
Wars,
out.
the 18th was suddenly unleashed against one of the Emperor's most dangerous enemies. 26,000 Astartes went in and only 1,000 walked out again, but the enemy was defeated and no other lives had been lost. Their Primarch
Were they
Vulcan
built to be
saved the
heroes
day
or
in much
martyrs?
the same manner during a desperate fight against a
Oh.
large orc raiding fleet. Vulcan, who
both.
had been found but not yet reunited with his legion,
Both
suddenly
is good.
arrived with
No, it
3,000
isn't.
new recruits
You don't
and
want both.
master-forged equipment for his battered legion, who
I
had
get
been
both.
holding the
Too bad.
line without him. Too late to save the former commanders of the 18th, Vulcan knelt to the men he had been too late to save, and the legion was his, renamed then to the Salamanders. This is why the 18th Legion was always the smallest. They'd swoop into these desperate situations and hold the line until their charges were safely away, or until they'd won, but always at the cost of many Astartes' lives. As for the heresy itself, the Salamanders did their best to be effective with their small numbers, but were subject to several terrible defeats at the hands of the traitor legions. Vulcan himself was even captured
Poor
briefly by the Night Lord,
Salamanders.
but
Mhm.
after several executions, the Night Haunter admitted that he didn't know how to kill the apparently immortal Salamander's Primarch. The
He
journeys
is
of
immortal.
Vulcan are too complex to voice here, but
Yeah.
just know that he's
Uh,
still out
Vulcan
there
is a
somewhere waiting
perpetual.
for his chance to return to his heroic gene sons. Until then, they'll continue being the Imperium's shield.
Yeah,
In the
we still
very
don't know where he
beginning,
is.
The 19th
Nope.
Legion was a guerrilla force, striking from the
A
shadows
lot of people
at
think he's
targets
actually
that would
dead.
cause the most
He can't
Damn.
be.
I know he can't be, but when Games
That's
Workshops
a skill issue.
says that every loyalist Primarch except Gilliman and Lionel Johnson is dead, then
disruption.
I don't
for the
know
enemy. They
Yeah,
operated quite
how
similarly
that's supposed to
to
work.
the Night Lords in this
I guess
regard,
that
the
means he's
intent
dead.
being to sow terror wherever
well then
they
maybe
went,
just like
and ensure
Sabretooth,
that
they
the
kind of just
prospect of
forgot that
fighting the
salamanders
Imperium was too
exist.
frightening to contemplate.
That's
Earlier,
possible.
however, they were often tasked with supporting the larger Luna Wolves Legion in their campaigns, so they never really gained the disgust
I
of
don't
their
think they're
peers
all
in
dead.
the same way that the Night Lords did. Regardless, after almost a century of the Great Crusade, the 19th Primarch was found. Corvus Corax had been living on a world called Deliverance and had spent much of that
Oh,
time
could I
leading
point
a
something
rebellion
out?
against the cruel rulers of that planet.
Yeah, what?
So from what I saw, the last video that you guys did with Warhammer,
Yeah,
they explained very briefly that Vulcan held the key to a weapon that would destroy Terra.
correct.
He is the Emperor's only option to give that weapon to.
Yep.
Because Vulcan is the only one pure enough in heart and tactically aware enough that if that's the only option, then it has to be made.
Yeah. I feel like there's
I mean, there's probably a few more, but he was just the one that kind of ended up with it.
Yeah.
And it was a good choice.
yeah, I feel like Gilliman would be a good choice because Gilliman.
Mhm.
And then Corax might also be a good choice, but that's iffy.
Mhm. Maybe Iron Hands, but
Their
don't know.
Ferrus Manus is dead.
well, yeah.
So that kind of throws a wrench in things.
Go push the button, you just throw it into his tomb.
Yep.
planet. When he saw how his legion made war, he was disgusted and purged the old leadership. He believed there were better ways to make an enemy fall than to
Disgusting.
terrorize innocent people. Instead, he trained his legion to become expert trackers and assassins, using their already prodigious skills.
You'd think that since Ferrus Manus has metal hands, do you think that his arms are rusted in his tomb?
It depends on the metal composite.
I don't remember what it was. I think it was adamantium, which doesn't actually exist.
In stealth operations to make them even more effective against dismantling power structures. Their success led to the newly renamed Raven Guard being requested for many campaigns, including the conflict at East Van 5.
Oh god.
Already one of the smallest legions, the Raven Guard were set upon by an ambush as the traitor legions revealed themselves by
The
turning
drop
their
site
guns
massacre.
on their former allies. Outnumbered
Damn.
and fighting a straight-out battle, not something the Raven Guard were well suited for, they were almost completely wiped out. The problems
same
didn't
with the
stop
Iron
there
Hands and the
either, with
Salamanders.
The Raven Guard gene seed beginning to deteriorate faster than normal, produce horrible mutations, and forcing recruitment to a crawl. This is a problem that persisted for most of the Legion's existence until the recent introduction of the Primaris Marines, which finally seems to have solved the problem. The Emperor had his wolfish executioners and his draconic heroes. The last thing he needed was a legion of serpentine spies. Kept intentionally at low membership like the other two specialty legions, extremely little is known about the Alpha Legion, originally known as the Ghost Legion. This seems to have been intentional as well, with false records being implanted at the same time as others are simply erased. This is because the special purpose of the Alpha Legion was to run subterfuge operations. Imperial records only confirm their existence with vague reports of small Alpha units operating far ahead of the main battle lines, gathering intel, assassinating key targets, and setting up informant networks among the Emperor's enemies, sometimes years before they even saw an Imperial fleet. From what we know, the standard operating procedure of the
Wow.
Alpha Legion goes like this. A small handful of Alpha Legion operatives, Astartes and mortal humans, arrive at the target location and begin setting up a network. This network begins to destabilize the enemy organizational structure with things like crime rings, political corruption, targeted assassinations, and the spreading of false information and propaganda. Once the enemy has been suitably thrown into disarray, the main Alpha Legion forces arrive and attack from as many angles as possible, spreading more chaos and finishing the job in a lightning strike. The nature of the Alpha Legion is such that we can never truly be sure of anything about them, but we do know that their Primarch is a man named Alfarius, a name that every Alpha Legionnaire gives to anyone outside the Legion when asked for identification. They also make attempts to look like their Primarch,
I don't know,
who
man.
is by all accounts one
Could
of the
be
smallest
him.
Primarchs.
That's basically it.
Also, he's got a twin brother. The biggest secret of the 20th Legion is that their Primarch is actually twins, Alfarius and Omegon. The two have even pretended to be one another to such an extent that while Alfarius is confirmed to have been killed sometime after the heresy, we're still not certain of which one died, or even if he actually did die.
Alfarius was confirmed to be dead, except we don't know if it was Alfarius or if either of them actually died. Despite the fact there were people there that shot them.
I don't know.
Despite the fact there were people there that shot them and saw the body, we don't know who it was or even if it was anybody.
This cloud of confusion goes
Could've
so
been
far
one of
as
our
to make it
random soldiers
completely
that we made to
uncertain
look like
whether
this.
the Alpha
Right?
Legion
We have no
actually
idea.
sided with Horus or not during the heresy. They certainly fought with him against the Loyalists and do the work of the Chaos to this day, but there are
Did they?
whispers that they are working from within to destabilize the efforts of the ruinous powers. Overall, the Space Marine Legions are some of 40K's most discussed areas of lore. They have evolved from simple two-dimensional flavors of combat styles to full-blown characters in an epic space opera. Thank you so much for watching our very first long-form video.
Yippee!
Alright.
Yep, first long form huh?
This was the first one they had put out. They didn't put out the other ones till later.
Okay.
Alright, so with that, what do we think?
10 out of 10.
Yeah, what do we think of all the different Space Marine Legions, who's your favorite? I know Frosty's is going to be Salamanders because,
Well, yeah, I'm not gonna change my mind.
Yeah.
I already got mine.
I don't know. I like the contrast between salamanders and iron hands because they're like almost polar opposites, but they both don't want to leave civilians to defend them for themselves.
Mm-hmm. I think you'd also really like the Lamenters because they are like even more kind than Salamanders.
Hmm.
They
But
are
those are the ones that have terrible luck.
Yeah, they have shit luck. They're one of the cursed
Yeah.
chapters, so they just have the worst luck ever.
Oh.
I'll send you a little thing about them later. But yeah, that's going to be it.
I do think I like the salamanders too.
Yeah, they're nice. They're nice. That's kind of the point of them. But
Be like, good. You better.
I like them. They're just not my favorite. But anyways, that's going to be it for today. Thank you all very much for watching. Remember to, as this guy says right here, give the video a thumbs up. Also, like, subscribe, share it. You know, do all the things YouTubers tell you to do. Check out our other reaction-style content. And check out our escapades in Forza Horizon 6. There's not going to be one coming out this week. This is just kind of, you know, the stand-in. This is the stand-in. Because we didn't quite have enough time to do Forza. It'll come out next week. But yeah. Anyway, that's going to be it. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.